Chapter 10. September 30, 1941, Oriel. Sergeant Diamond did not sleep either. In the dark, the flame of a cigarette seemed almost red, alarming. That's how they begin to sin with excessive impressionability, the inner voice reproached. When he found out where he was going to go, a member of the Komsomol, probably a member of the Komsomol, 100 out of 100, Demon did not show surprise. Or maybe not surprised. In the twilight of the night, when the face is barely distinguishable, the alien soul is doubly dark. The car rumbled and rumbled along the streets vaguely familiar to Godunov. Confused? Oh really? There, on the starboard side, it is turning white, not at all elegant, no, in a capitulation depressive way, you can't say otherwise. The Church of Michael the Archangel, on the left side, the tower of the central bank is turning purple. Taramok, who lives in the Taramoka? In deep basements designed for money storage. And above, in rooms with lancet windows, officials in Gestapo uniforms with proverbial German pedantry will steadily implement the Ostplan. On predetermined days, cars will drive up to these beautiful wrought iron gates to bravura marches roaring from loudspeakers and take people out to executions. It is necessary to save fuel. The Germans are a practical, economical people, not spoiled by an excess of strategic resources, so the places of executions will be determined nearby. At the same, for example, Malaya Gadi, from which the teenager Sanka Godunov reached the city center in a couple of hours, but somehow he managed it on a bet and a half. A friend on Gadi had, there will be a dacha. Going to secretly drink beer from their parents, they, interspersed with children's horror stories, will tell each other local legends they heard from grandparents, when with a smile, and when with an eye. In an undertone. Because it really is creepy. It was then that Sanka would find out. In the autumn of 42, one of the locals found a bottle with a pacifier in the roadside bushes. And she went for a walk along the Gadi, and outside the chilling story of a young woman shot along with a baby. One of the locals in the fall of 42 found a bottle with a pacifier in the roadside bushes. And she went for a walk along the Gadi, and outside the chilling story of a young woman shot along with a baby. One of the locals in the fall of 42 found a bottle with a pacifier in the roadside bushes. And she went for a walk along the Gadi, and outside the chilling story of a young woman shot along with a baby. Sanka did not believe in this story then. He was a well-read kid. He even learned the tricky word cliché, which he sometimes flaunted in front of his friends, ignoring ridicule. I read and reread, and not just mastered at the request of teachers, like other classmates, the huge novel The Young Guard, was deeply impressed, and after a couple of documentary books on this topic, I flipped through. I remembered the episode of the execution of miners and Soviet employees at the very beginning of the occupation. I remembered that there was a woman with a baby there. And then I learned the name of the woman, which Fadiev did not mention, Evgenia Locust. So I didn't believe in the story of the nameless Orlov woman. And I wouldn't believe to this day if, many years later, he, who had already changed his thankless service to even more thankless schoolwork, was one good man, also a military commander in the past, and now the commissar of the search detachment, did not name Maria Zemskaya, an underground worker from the group of Vladimir Setkin. Stop. What did Obolensky call the priest? Maybe, of course, another coincidence, but less and less one believes in the game of chance, and more, in the signs of fate. And I don't care that it sounds pathetic. Here, no pathos will reach the real thing. On both sides of the street were the trade rows. Unusually squat, two-story, as on old postcards. Well, yes, the third one will be built after the war. After what is yet to come. Showcases and windows are sometimes covered with plywood shields, sometimes they are somehow boarded up with boards. It seems that Godunov never sinned with an excessive associative perception of reality. Although he didn't go into his pocket for a word, it seemed that thoughts went in a close formation, serious, strict, appropriate situations, but one jumped across in a colorful allegory. Here he is, visible a symbol of the defense of the eagle, where is a well-fitted shield, and where hastily nailed boards. And there's nothing you can do, even kill yourself. We drove along the red bridge, which I was tempted to call the Mariinsky, the columns at the entrance, the metal, but not at all heavyweight ligature of the fence. In real history, gradually losing reality, the Nazis will blow it up. When retreating. An old, very old misunderstanding, why didn't ours blow up? Tanks pass through the old Krasno with chic, just as in a few decades wedding corteges will drive along the new Krasno to the memorial to the tankers' liberators. Was there nothing? Nobody? Following the meeting, Godunov could confidently say, "These assumptions do not correspond to the truth." Were you waiting for an order? From whom? Is it not from someone who will take responsibility for the defense, and for the retreat? It is this conclusion that suggests itself. And no matter how sad it is to give such an order, but you have to. He himself did not really know why he needed to go. That is, I could not rationally explain, and who needs it? Is it rational? For Demon, there is subordination and order. And in the bossy head of Comrade Godunov, rational thoughts and little thoughts do not push through, so it will not become crowded from one irrational one. As well as from the act provoked by this thought. In fact, a lone Emka from the headquarters garage, carrying such a valuable cargo as a senior major of state security, should have been stopped. If it had happened for fun, that is, in another movie masterpiece, replete with blunders and clichés elevated to the rank of historical truth and artistic finds, then harsh men in cornflower blue caps would have blocked the path, after which a political detective story or an action movie with chasers would certainly begin and shooters. Well, in a real frontline city, the number of options increased dramatically, and at the same time, the likelihood of meeting, if not with the Chekists, then with the police, if not with the police, then with the guys from the fighter battalion, also increased, and yet no one stopped the car. Godunov had no right to reassure himself by attributing this unfortunate fact to the fact that the journey lasted a quarter of an hour at the most. And he drew conclusions. For the very near future. What else has not been taken into account, not stipulated? It is clear that everything is up to the figure. And this, to hell, will have to be dealt with as problems arise. As long as there is enough time and opportunity. In the meantime. For now, he ordered me to park at Pervomaysky Square. In that past future, which he knew about from books and from the stories of his old people, and which now may not come, I wanted to believe, it won't, Pervomaysky during the days of occupation, overnight and for many months, will turn into a place of execution. They will hang directly on the trees, without being puzzled by the construction of the gallows. Violation of the curfew, returning to the city from the village relatives not by highway, but by an impassable road, sabotage. And no matter how many conventions are concluded before and after, no matter how many attempts are made to make war a purely male occupation, it will never become a series of defensive battles and offensives, positional battles and attacks. What will happen in the occupied Oral is also a war. And who, if not fighters, should be considered two teenagers who will be hanged on one of these trees? I didn't want to guess which one, for refusing to carry out labor service. That is, to work for the occupiers. Babkin's older sister saw, and then all her life she could not forget. Two boys, the same age as his schoolchildren. 2 out of several hundred hanged. 2 of the several thousand executed in Pervomaysky Square, in the city park, in the courtyard of the Orlovsky Central. In hard times, the most courageous and desperate are always the first to leave. Is it because cowardly prudence is genetically fixed in order to predetermine the fate of future generations? My heart is on the edge, it has a fresh European-style renovation, and my thoughts are entirely universal, that is, about everyone and about no one but myself. And in August 1943, here, in the park, they will bury those who still firmly remembered what it is, military duty and what the words, for one's friends mean. And Pervomaysky Park of tankers will become, and through it, updated, many personal stories will pass, including his, Sanka Godunov, a youth soldier at the turn of the 70s and 80s. And in another 30 years, his cabin crew will carry the memory watch at the 34 and the eternal flame. And along the way, to take a variety of tests, from disassembling and assembling the machine to historical information about this place. It was then that Godunov would find out that even earlier there was Ilyanskaya Square with the chapel of Alexander Nevsky on this place. Your, Alexander Light Vasilich, your personal story, with the one that you know from books, contacted with a C-Not. In that former reality, 60 years later, on the southwestern outskirts, next to your typical 5-story building, a new chapel of Alexander Nevsky will be built in memory of the defenders of the city. On the defensive line. It already exists. Although it is still very conditional. There are fortifications. But any line of defense is, first of all, people. The fates of which you have already changed. Is it hard to be a god? Especially if your abilities are by no means superhuman. It's hard. But not to be is even more difficult. Godunov looked back at Diamond, he was smoking again. He feels like an adult, doesn't he? Or just more confident? I felt an unbearable desire to smoke, although usually, to the constant surprise of all smoking friends, Godunov controlled this habit as he pleased. I remember that even my grandfather, when Sanka arrived on his first vacation in Fominka, noticed this, as he put it, strangeness, at the same time and concluded in his usual manner. Know that you are dashing, Shirka, you have never had enough of it to the fullest. And now, in Pervomaysky Square, which has not yet become a tanker's square, attacked from two flanks at once by thoughts about the future, which only yesterday was the distant past, and about the past that remains in the future, Godunov was drawn to smoke. To such an extent that it twisted. But to beg, even with a proud, bossy look, is a cigarette from a subordinate. This was decisively contrary to principles. And he, turning sharply to the left in a circle, walked towards the two churches, Preobrazhenskaya and Pokrovskaya. He remembered them from photographs taken by his amateur photographer grandfather. My mother's family then lived 150 paces away, in a small house built after the war. In the photo, the churches were without domes, with exposed masonry, crippled. For some reason, it was terrifying for Sanka to look at these pictures, worse than the photographs of the ruins after the bombing, and to admit such weakness is ashamed. And once he tore them up and threw them out of the window, the wind blew the pieces and no one missed the photos. Then I happened to see pre-revolutionary photos in expensive gift folios produced by local book publishers and read that Preobrazhenskaya and Pokrovskaya were perhaps the most beautiful churches of Oral. But the photographs did not give the slightest idea about this. The churches were taken as if by the way, much more attention was paid to the bridge, and the trade rose, and the shops near Ilyinka, yes, just everyday scenes. Now Godunov understood that for once the local historians did not lie. Churches, even without crosses and with crumbling plaster in some places, were good. And, side by side, they emphasized the symbolic difference. Pokrovskaya is feminine and slender, slightly angular, Preobrazhenskaya is powerful, strict. Pokrovskaya was locked up, a huge padlock, which, even in the pre-dawn twilight, Godunov could see, had not yet had time to rust. One of the doors of Preobrazhenskaya was ajar. And he stepped into the unsteady twilight, and groped among the shelves and boxes until he was called. "Who are you looking for?" "No." From behind the bulk of the closet stepped out, as it seemed to Godunov at first, a teenage girl, tiny, thin, wrapped in a grandmother's downy shawl. "Who do you want?" She repeated in a thin, cracked voice, and raised the wax candle high, almost on her outstretched arm. The face, an old woman's face, also seemed to Godunov to be waxy, the features soft, as if sagging. Seeking. "I would like to see Ivan Grigorievich." The old woman slowly looked at the newcomer from head to toe, said without any expression. "We're already yours." "The messenger has arrived." "Messenger," Godunov corrected mechanically. Granny, apparently, doesn't even understand ranks. It doesn't matter to her whether she is a senior sergeant or a senior major, so there is no sense in long speeches. At first they were looking for the father at home. "Well, he's been at home for the second time already. I mean, he's been away for a week since the fire victims settled here with us," the old woman explained for some unknown reason. "Bombed from Viganoy, neighbors, therefore, fathers, and then also from Pervomayskaya and from Naganoy. Badyushka settled one family, those with smaller children, to live with him, and the rest, therefore, here." Silenced. She stood, shaking her head, as if making up her mind. Godunov thought that now she would finally go after Zemsky. But no, with an age-old, unhurried, viscous woman's movement, she straightened a strand of surprisingly dark hair that had escaped from under the scarf, and said in the same even voice. "Nikishkin came the third day, he cursed so much, he says, 'Why did you set up a hospice in a state institution?' No, you didn't say that, they set up a hotel." She was silent again, looked searchingly at Godunov. "They say, 'What can we expect from you, dear man?'" Finally, she concluded. "Well, now it's time to wake up the priest by the morning." During these days, he was completely exhausted with the fire victims, while he helped to get over, and now yours arrived at night. Here it is, it means something. Grandma was playing for time, gaining minutes of sleep for Father John. "Oh, well, the same harmful old woman, but well done, behind his mountain." That's what I wanted to say. Her voice sounded stern, even the sonority diminished. "If you didn't come to him about the fire victims, but came to embarrass him, you better go in peace." "Embarrass?" asked Godunov in surprise. "It's not for him to take up arms." "I don't quite understand." "No, you still need to insist on an immediate meeting with the priest." Grandma draws her into a strange dialogue, only now it's up to religious philosophy. You worldly people think in a worldly way, the old woman began patiently, as if exhorting, to explain. And you don't believe that the day will come when you too will realize that everything is the will of God. Your weapons are all sorts of tanks, machine guns with airplanes. Oh, grandmother, if only they were tanks with planes. I would drink honey with your mouth. Godunov thought with growing anguish. And our weapon is prayer. Not my will, but yours be done. That's right. Even if they come to kill? Godunov burst out. And they will come. Everything is in the hands of God, both life and death. And such hopelessness wafted from this phrase that Godunov hastened to cheerfully object. And the people from ancient times said, trust in God, but don't make a mistake yourself. In their pride, people decided that they themselves are in charge of their own destiny. The old woman sighed contritely. It would not be possible to first ask God to guide the true path, and then, having prayed, and take it, as the grandfathers took it and rebuffed the adversary. Perhaps this time they could have overcome it. She sighed again and added either offendedly, or plaintively, Father didn't say yes or no to your envoy. I asked for time until morning. Yes, I just see. The blood leapt up in him, he remembered the affairs of the world. And we prayed side by side. He, so that the Lord would show the way, and I, a sinner, so that the Lord would not let him backtrack from his vows. And, sadly clasping her hands, the flame of the candle fluttered, trying to level off, she whispered quickly, quickly, as if in a hurry to ward off misfortune. You don't know him, after all. If anything, he will exhaust himself. Nevertheless, I insist on a personal conversation, Godunov rapped out. And again, visibly, to the point of aching in the temples, I felt how one fate was connected, tightly linked with thousands of others. We still have maidens to serve, the interlocutor reminded him in tone. To you? Asked Godunov. I'm a local psalmist. Was. And, God willing, I will. Who to us, Stesha? The darkness asked softly. The military to you, she answered angrily. So what made him wait? The military people, Stepan and Adushka, now have more worries than ours, Father John gently reproached and, stepping silently, approached. I beg your pardon, soundly, you see, fell asleep. How long have you been waiting for me? He was short and thin, in the dim light his grey hair seemed yellowish, and his face very pale. The most common face. But for some reason Godunov was sure that it was memorable. Not that, but time, you understand, is running out, he replied, intuitively feeling that there was no reason to play diplomat. I understand, the priest said, still quietly. Godunov suddenly remembered a neighbor, an anti-aircraft lieutenant colonel, with whose younger son he had been friends in his early youth. By that time, Vasily Grigorievich had long retired, worked in some office with a technical bias, but the command artillery base was as indestructible as the Ukrainian accent. And in general, Father John seemed so far from military service that Godunov, willy-nilly, wondered if there had been a mistake, although what kind of mistake could there be? Are you for an answer? Zemsky asked, somewhat surprised. Sorry, I don't really understand the current ranks, but... However, understanding was quite enough to figure out, the visitor is a big shot, such people do not come for a conversation themselves, but invite them to their place. And what to answer? Walked past, decided to look. I didn't want to write a plausible answer. Fatigue fell on the wounded bear, dangerous fatigue, you can't give in to this, then you won't get up. After hesitating, Godunov confessed. Yes and no. To be honest, it didn't occur to me that you would hesitate with the answer. I caught Stepanita's reproachful glance. But if you are now ready to give an answer, I will be sincerely grateful to you. Because we don't have time to think. There is a time for everything, and a time for everything under heaven, Father John said slowly, as if not addressing Godunov, but talking to himself. A time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to destroy and a time to build, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather stones, a time to hug and a time to avoid hugging, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to save and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. While the priest was speaking, Godunov struggled to understand what was more in these words, hopelessness or hope. Whoever is among the living, there is still hope. Zemsky seemed to have overheard his thoughts. Ecclesiastes. In adolescence, something read, I suppose? You may not believe me, but there is always time. In this world, a person does not live outside of time. Only different it, time something. And the one who is not afraid of today's misfortune will know joy tomorrow. And the one who is afraid today will be in fear tomorrow. Well, I won't test your patience. Tell me where and at what time I should arrive. Stepanida gasped in shock. Don't, Stesha, don't say anything now, Father John asked. Remember, after all, what you promised, fulfill. It's better for you not to promise than to promise and not fulfill. They will deprive you of your dignity, Father. Lamentations broke through in the voice of the old psalmist. And a sin, a great sin. But will it not happen that I will commit an even greater sin by refusing to protect my neighbor? The priest asked in an even voice. It will be his will, we will overcome. And what is in our power, we will do, for it is said, everything that your hand can do, do it according to your strength. They write Agodimaitians on their buckles, Godunov said muffledly, not understanding himself why. The name of God is on the lips, worldly passions in the heart, bad passions, Father John said quietly. It has been so since ancient times. He paused, as if deciding on something. Let's go. While Godunov, following the priest, made his way between the boxes and shelves deep into the temple, he had a feeling, for some reason, he did not even want to mentally say, déjà vu. The feeling of what has been seen before. The whitewash on the walls looked dull grey in the dark. In the chips of plaster, as in the windows, faces darkened. The saints gazed into the world with meek sorrow. After all, they, too, are endowed with after-knowledge. For some reason this strange thought reassured me. Several boxes of papers. A crazy thought flashed through, what if this is not accidental? What if his hitting is just a brief voyage that began in one archive and must end in another? What if you rummage through the papers, but how will you find a pass back? Don't lie to yourself, Alexander Vassilievich, lying to yourself is the last thing. Even if you knew for sure that he was lying down, waiting for you, you would hardly have undertaken to look for him. And not because you are some kind of hero, and not even because you have messianic ambitions. It's just that once upon a time, in the days of doubt and painful reflection, as a classic would say, you once and for all determined for yourself, if there is a strong anchor and a reliable lifeline in the world, it is the promise you made. What did the Father say? I remembered word for word, what you promised, fulfill. It is better for you not to promise than to promise and not fulfill. The answer may not be to all questions, but to many. On the rope stretched from rack to rack, white curtains were made, they must have been made of sheets. The victims of the fire had already settled down, separated rooms for themselves, and sleepy snoring could be heard from behind the curtains. Godunov nearly tripped over a tricycle. And at that moment I suddenly realized where it came from, this feeling. The same thing happened to him when he read good, truthful, that is, historical novels, which remain life-affirming, no matter what tragedies unfold in them. Near the eastern wall, it must be understood, where the altar used to rise, on an office table covered with a lace tablecloth, icons were placed, some in heavy metal settings, others in simple wooden frames, or even not framed at all. Stepanida silently lit the lamp and stepped aside. Godunov did not look at her, but felt her fixed, stern gaze on him. I understand that you reject the idea of an existing God, Father John spoke in the same even voice. However, faith lives in each of us, it burns in some, smolders in others, and no one knows where the wind will come from, which will fan the flames. You have your own faith, which compels you to act this way and not otherwise. And now, for good. After all, you also need this, to strengthen your spirit. Pray with me. How you feel, how you know how. Godunov followed his gaze. On a small tablet, slightly larger than the palm of his hand, against an autumn-yellow background, was a fair-haired warrior in Byzantine-style armor. On the head is a crown resembling a church dome, on the shoulders is a royal scarlet mantle, lined with ermine, in the right hand is an upraised cross, in the left is a sword, its tip resting on a rocky path, and behind the back is a church with domed helmets. Not just a church, a stronghold. But he, a warrior, defends this stronghold. Still on the way to it. On the closest approaches. A quick helper of all who diligently resort to you and our warm intercessor before the Lord, the Holy Noble Grand Duke Alexandra. Look graciously on those who are now worthy, having created many iniquities indecent for yourself, now flowing to your icon and crying out to you from the depths of your heart. You were a zealot and defender of the Orthodox faith in your life, and we are unshakable in it with your warm prayers to God. Father John fell silent for a while, glanced briefly at Stepanida, silently repeating the words of the prayer, and turned his gaze to Godunov. Not questioning, encouraging. And he spoke again. You have carefully passed the service entrusted to you, and with your help to stay whoever is expected, in what you are called to eat, instruct. You, having defeated the regiments of adversaries, drove you away from the Russian borders, and overthrow all visible and invisible enemies who are taking up arms against us. You are a happy man after all, Godunov. Because you know, victory will still be. You don't believe, you know. No matter how long the eagle holds out, a day, 3, a week, she will come. Not later than the 9th of May 45th. It's easier for you because you know. You, having left the perishable crown of the earthly kingdom, have chosen a silent life, and now you are righteously crowned with an incorruptible crown. Reign in heaven, intercede for us, we humbly pray to you, a quiet and serene life enter the eternal kingdom, arrange for us a steady procession by your intercession. Godunov turned around at the rustle. A little way off stood a girl in a light dress, dark braids arranged in a crown, and a knot at her feet. Silent. Waited. Coming with all the saints to the throne of God, praying for all Orthodox Christians, may the Lord God save them with his grace and peace, health, long life and all prosperity in the coming years. May we ever praise and bless God, in the Trinity of the Holy glorified Father and Son and the Holy Spirit, now and ever and forever and ever. Amen. The priest slowly made the sign of the cross. Looked at the girl. What are you, Mashenka? I brought things. Not very much, everything that I managed to collect. The Makarovs helped, grandfather Petro, even our settlers. The main thing is diapers for Samushka. Valyusha shared. The girl smiled, but it was noticeable, tense, anxious. Why are you walking in the dark? Stepanida grumbled worriedly. Yes, why go here, Aunt Stesh? And when would I come? You won't have time to look back, it's time to go to work, and our business does not wait until the evening. My niece Maria, the priest explained to Godunov. I brought clothes for the fire victims. Wait for me here, Masha, I'll see the guest off, and then we'll talk. I'm in a hurry, Uncle Van, I have to cook more for Valyushka. She really was in a hurry, parting, barely taking a breath. It's as if the pain is talking, thought Godunov. Here Stepanida and Father John look at her, almost not melting their anxiety. The 4 of us came out, the last, a little behind, was Stepanida. Maria hurriedly said goodbye and left. Don't be angry with her, Stepanida said in a whisper for some reason. Her husband disappeared without a trace, the other week. Here's another question, Father John interrupted the psalmist, as if continuing the conversation. I'm in the archives. Other documents were taken away, but much more remained. Don't worry, from this day on you are in a different department. We will find to whom to entrust your papers, he answered the priest, and thought about his niece. About another random, non-random meeting. No, it's not easier for you from what you know, it's not easier at all. On the way, he again could not take a nap or think about the future. There was something else in my mind. Personal, you can't say otherwise. Father was remembered. In one of their last meetings, they had a conversation about why Godunov Sr. did not join the party. The father answered immediately, you see, he himself answered this question a long time ago. At the front, I was still a member of the Komsomol. Then he somehow hesitated, while getting used to civilian life and wandering around the cities and villages. And when I matured, I realized that there was nothing more for me to do in the party. Real communists, that is, the Bolsheviks, they either died on the battlefields, or returned and honestly, without stalking anyone, worked, under the guidance of swindlers with party cards, from which the current fat cats later grew up. With cat psychology, yeah. Eat sweeter, sleep better and shit so that there is nothing for it. Yes, and small people like me, why did they go to the party? Get a position and feel like a big person, overtake non-party neighbors in the queue for an apartment? And what, excuse me, does this have to do with the precepts of Marxism-Leninism? Inversely proportional? Even in his old age, his father remained a caustic man, and simply caustic. But my mother, a communist with 30 years of experience, suddenly began to go to church. From that day in the fall of 1991, when the factory bosses, also all party members, placed a ballot box at the checkpoint and ordered party cards to be thrown into it. Something broke in Mom. And she, who always served as a support for everyone, began to look for support for herself. Did you really have to go back 70 years to meet both a real communist and a real orthodox? With people who were willing to pay any price for their beliefs? And I also thought, no matter how the future is transformed now, no matter how destinies change, they must survive. The restless young woman Maria, her daughter Valushka, and those two boys whom he had never seen, did not even know their names. He wants them to survive. The city still seemed deserted and sleepy. But it just seemed. Godunov was firmly convinced that what was discussed at the night meeting had already begun to be implemented. Creating a New Reality. Chapter 11. September 30, 1941, Oriel. At 3 o'clock in the morning, a khaki-painted MK drove along the central street of Stalin, turned onto Penevskaya and stopped at the gate of an unremarkable house. The door slammed, and almost immediately there was a demanding knock. The discordant barking of dogs splashed excitedly. A minute later the door opened in the house, letting out the owner on the porch in a coat draped over a whitening undershirt. After all, it's cool outside at night. Autumn. Who's there? Comrade Abramov? Yes, I. And what, in fact? Open. I'm here by order of the city's defense headquarters. The sound of the unlocked bolt of the gate. A shout at the dog. A man in a raincoat enters the yard. Comrade Abramov, receive and familiarize yourself. A sealed package passes from hand to hand. Come into the house, please, come in. Again, briefly highlighting the silhouettes, the doorway brightens. 10 minutes later, the owner of the house, already dressed as expected, with a briefcase in hand, follows the military man from the yard and gets into the car, which immediately takes off, awakening all the local dog brethren again. Half an hour later, the director of the regional radio relay station, Vitaly Isarkovich Abramov, is already climbing the steps of the Oriel radio house, presenting a pass to a policeman surprised by a night visit. After another 40-odd minutes, accompanied by a militia boy in an unrumpled Red Army uniform, 2 out-of-breath employees hurriedly go there. At 5:30 on the morning of September 30th, something clicked and rustled in all the street and home loudspeakers in the city, and at an inopportune time the beats of the Internationale rang out. When the powerful melody of the country's anthem faded, the awakened Oriel people heard the familiar, well-placed voice of the announcer. To the soldiers of the Red Army and the inhabitants of the city of Oriel and the Oriel region. Comrades, the situation on the Soviet-German front in some areas has become more complicated over the past day. There are breakthroughs of the front line by enemy units. There was an immediate threat to the city. Having assumed command of the Oriel defensive region, I order. First. From 0 hours on the 30th of September, consider the city of Oriel and its environs under martial law. Any violation of the established order must be suppressed by all available means, up to the application of the highest measure of social protection. Second. All able-bodied population aged 16 to 62 years, with the exception of pregnant women, disabled people with lesions of the musculoskeletal system, vision, hearing and mental impairment, as well as women with dependent children under the age of 12, are declared mobilized for defensive work. The persons named above are subject to immediate mandatory evacuation from the city and its environs before 21 hours on the 1st of October of this year. All mobilized are ordered to report immediately to the premises of the district committees of the party. Persons working in the defense industry are transferred to the barracks at the place of work. Citizens who have passed the OSO-Aviakim norms for the right to wear the signs Voroshilovsky shooter of both levels, ready for sanitary defense, ready for chemical defense, as well as persons who served in the old army in sappers, artillery and machine gun teams, are placed at the disposal of the city's defense headquarters directly. They must arrive at the building of the Regional Military Commissariat no later than 11 o'clock in the morning on the 30th of September. Third. All armed units, regardless of departmental affiliation, are placed at the disposal of the city defense headquarters. Fourth. All vehicles of enterprises and the population, up to bicycles of adult models, are declared requisitioned and must be handed over for defense needs. Fifth. Sixth. Seventh. Signature, Commander of the Oriel Defense Region. Senior Major of State Security Godunov. The announcer's voice fell silent. There was a rustling and rustling in the speakers, then, apparently, the needle of the gramophone caught the track, and right there on the streets and in the houses of the Oriel residents, trumpets rattled, Chernetsky's March Parade rang with dish-shaped copper. Half the night the machine rattled in the printing house of Orlovskaya Pravda, print after print the harsh lines of the order. For half a day, over and over again, the announcer repeated into the microphone, there was an immediate threat. The broadcast of the appeal was replaced by music recorded on black gramophone records, and again it sounded, to the soldiers of the Red Army and the inhabitants of the city of Oryol and the Oryol region. Already early in the morning, postmen on bicycles, habitually throwing calico bags over their shoulders, stopped at crossroads and near shops, posting the text of the appeal around the city. The enemy was at the door. Tanechka Kushchina was proud of her profession. What's wrong with that? Not every girl in the USSR should be a pilot, like Ryskova with Grizodubova, or a heroine tractor driver, like Pasha Angelina. If each one sits at the helm or, for example, sits at the levers, then you won't get enough of planes with tractors for all the girls of the Soviet Union. So why create unnecessary trouble for the beloved proletarian state? So the majority of Soviet women work in other areas, albeit not so romantic and heroic. Who is at the enterprises at the machines? Who is in the canteen kitchen at the boilers? Who is busy with the children in the children's hearth? Who elsewhere? All works are good, as the best, most talented poet of our Soviet era wrote. And after work, of course, every woman wants to look attractive. Glory to labor, we do not live in a capitalist country, we have the opportunity to preen. At least the townspeople. Well, in order to comply with the trends, the direct path to beauty was through the House of Life, where you can order a new dress in the atelier, put heels on shoes, and build a new hairstyle along with a holly of nails. So what? In the USSR, everything is for the working people. At least, in the regional center. So our Tanechka worked in the Oryol House of Life as a master hairdresser. It worked well, it hung photographically on the honorary red board. Women in the queue to her for 2 months signed up. And what's wrong? A tired, exhausted aunt sat in an armchair, and a joyful, pretty woman with a beautiful haircut and well-groomed nails came out of the door of the House of Life. Of course, Tanechka Kushchina did not start her appearance either. She was always neatly combed, modestly but neatly dressed, her nails shimmered with manicure. Even after the start of the war, she did not change her habits, although she changed her place of work from the Dombatov hairdressers to a sanitary checkpoint. As before, scissors clicked loudly in deft fingers, a clipper pressed in, and the dirty hair of fighters, commanders, refugees fell on grey sheets and floors. Sometimes, with a large influx of processed, the floor was covered with hair in several layers, like a felt mat. The nightmare moved in places from lice and nits, the soles slid through greasy hair. But the manicure never peeled off Tanya's nails. But then the penultimate September day came, when a heavy Tula lock hung on the door of the sanitary inspection room, and all the workers went to the district committee of the All-Union Communist Party of Bolsheviks, according to the mobilization order. Try not to go, after all, martial law has been declared in the city. So, for non-execution of orders it is necessary, the workers of the sanitary inspection room, who stood in a huge queue for an hour and a half, were sent to receive construction equipment, and only one Kushchina was separated from the comrades by a tired, wrinkled sergeant with a bandaged neck. It hurts you, Pigalitsa, slender. That work will not be for you. How so? Everyone, so for them, but I, therefore, am unworthy? This is what is going on. Do not race, I say. It will work for you too. Check out the crumbs. The sergeant got up from the table and, bowing his head, went into the next room. A minute later he returned with paper. So. You, Comrade Kushchina, will now go to this address, present a referral and get to work. And now Tanechka is no longer a hairdresser, but a fighter of Kushin, and she works not in a household, and not even in a sanitary checkpoint, but at one of the district art warehouses. And she does not use scissors with a comb, a ramrod, but a brush, and rags, and a knockout. But they didn't give Tatiana Red Army uniforms, and she had to press the machine gun barrels covered with grease directly to the blue civilian jacket. And how not to press something? Well, these large caliber machine guns are heavy. You can break even very easily. And there's nothing to be done, the conservation grease to the metal must be removed, otherwise, as the local gunsmith explained, these machine guns are not suitable for shooting. And then clean it up. And then lubricate it again, this time with another oil, gun oil. And then again drag the iron into their boxes. And there are 200 of them, dshk of these damned ones. Fighters come every 20 or 30 minutes, receive boxes with machine guns, cartridges, grenades, fuses. They take them away. Soon the next ones come. And again. And again. Hour after hour. After midnight, Tanya dragged and put the last reopened body of the machine gun in a box. I went to the disassembly table to clean up the lye, oil and everything else. Did not make it. I sat down for a second, let your back rest a little. And, as if an ebony switch had been turned, she fell into a dreamless sleep. She slept sitting, and only the girl's head lay on crossed palms with cracked nails, black from oil and grease. In her happiest dreams, Zina Vorogashina walked through the forest. Usually with girlfriends, sometimes alone, but it happened with a boy, whose face for some reason I could not see. I only felt a handshake for a long time after waking up, as if the blades of grass tingled my skin pleasantly. The forest has always been summer, bright, the sun with all its rays reached for the earth, and the earth towards it, with everything that grows on it. Zina once wrote in an essay, and Klavdia Dmitrievna praised her very much. The teacher was never generous with kind words, but they were valued above laudable sheets. And Shkopinskaya knew how to captivate by example like no one else, with her both for a walk around the city, and for a hike in the places where in the 19th year our people smashed Denikin's people, and to the Museum of Local Law. The museum also once dreamed of Zina, strangely dreamed like that, as if she had not seen something important, but what? Don't understand. And as soon as the war began, nothing good was already dreamed of, fragments of today's events were seen mixed with what was to be done tomorrow. Even in a dream, my legs hurt and shivered. Through drowsiness, I remembered, it is imperative to sew up slippers. Canvas slippers are not the best shoes for autumn, but what can you do if comfortable low-heeled shoes are torn 2 weeks ago? We ought to beg to go home, to see if there might be some other shoes. Did she hear, or was she only dreaming? As the guys from the patrol came, a tin mug muffled on the edge of the tank, someone laughed softly. No, not a dream. Laughter would definitely not be a dream. It's good that the worst thing is also not a dream. I don't dream about the bombing, under which she and Tamaka got 21, no, already 22 days ago. Zina herself did not know why she was counting. Counting the days that might not have happened. You can't think about it, you can't, otherwise. And she tried to imagine walking through the forest, and the sun's rays stroking her shoulders. And your feet will get cold, it's just cold dew, soon it will dry up, and, on June 22nd, she was also going to the forest. For all day. The girls came after her, she got agitated that she was not ready yet, her mother had tied up these most ill-fated canvas slippers somewhere. Finally got out. And towards me, the neighbor woman Tanya, her hair was knocked out from under the scarf, her look was confused. Girls, did you listen to the radio? War. For some reason, at that moment, Zina was not at all scared. And it wasn't tanks from the movie Tractor Drivers that introduced themselves, and not even a 3-ruler, which I happened to hold in my hands at Oso Aviakimov's classes, but something from War and Peace, something that has a place in the past and in books, but not in present, not on this sunny Sunday afternoon. And, walking next to her friends in the district committee of the Komsomol, she mentally repeated the verses of Denis Davidov about the partisans of that war, which had sunk into her memory. And rushes along a secret path, rising from the valley of battle. Riders cheerful swarm. For distant fishing, like a pack of hungry wolves. They hover in the valleys. Now they listen to the rustle, then again. Silently they continue to roam. And when 300 Komsomol members, familiar to Zina and not familiar, but still her comrades, right here, in the large hall of the district committee, wrote the same words, "Please send me to the front," she brought out on a neatly torn from whose on a school notebook sheet, "Please send me to a partisan detachment," and ended up in a fighter battalion. Together with some of those who asked to go to the front. It sounds menacing, in a military way, destruction battalion, patrol. In fact, it's the usual walking of 2 or 3 of us around the city, only for a long, long time, sometimes it seems endless. And your own clothes, everyday, familiar, and your own shoes, worn out, comfortable. So at first it seems, but then you still trample your feet to bloody calluses. And you are constantly waiting, will a rocket take off into the sky? This means that they are about to start bombing, we must rush with all our might with a report to the commander, notify, warn the inhabitants so that they go down to the bomb shelters. And themselves, how lucky. For the first time, he and Tamaka had no luck 22 days ago, near the railway technical school. Zina buried her nose in the damp-smelling grass and covered her head with her hands. Not because it was taught, but to hide from panic fear. There was a hysterical roar overhead, and then it thumped so that the ground shook and something fell on his back, like peas from a torn sack. Zina did not immediately hear the silence. Yes, it turns out that silence is sometimes harder to hear than screaming and roaring. Uncertainly she got up, and her legs almost gave way again. Right in front of her was a gaping funnel. What is there? Unlucky? How lucky? Pa, so as not to jinx it. Zina thought once again, and was again ashamed. She was a Komsomol member, but as you remember, Grandma's superstitions creep into her head. No, you have to think about the good in order to dream of a forest. He dreamed. Summer, light, but for some reason it was creepy. Zina knew that she could not get out. She did not get lost. No, here is a well-trodden path, and people are nearby. Over there, in the pine forest, Tamakin's sundress turns white. But there, behind the forest, something very bad, dangerous. Zinka! Pashka, a freckled boy from another school, shook her by the shoulder. It was high time to think, from our battalion, but it was more familiar. Zinka, listen. There was an immediate threat to the city. Having assumed command of the Oriel defensive region, I order. First. From 0 hours on the 30th of September, consider the city of Oriel and its environs under martial law. To stop any violation of the established order by all available means. And how much time? Zina asked in a whisper for some reason, although no one was sleeping anymore. It's not 5 yet, Pashka answered hurriedly. Wait, don't stop listening. What will happen? Zina whispered even quieter, no longer addressing anyone. The entire working-age population. Between the ages of 16 and 62, with the exception of Klavdia Dmitrievna Shkopinskaya raised her hand, palm forward, asking her interlocutor to keep quiet. The habitual gesture, which instantly established silence in the classroom, was well known to Sasha Kocherov, and he stopped in mid-sentence. Although he was in a hurry, before work he ran to a neighbor and his former teacher to find out if there was a letter from her daughter Lida, and, to be completely honest, if there was a word or two about him, is declared mobilized for defensive work. Something is happening, Sasha, the teacher spoke slowly, evenly, as if thinking aloud. Something very important. To be honest, I'm already worried. That's why she asked Lida to stay in Moscow. She explained that she should not interrupt her studies. This is not a lie. Although I don't think a half-truth is better than a lie, but, she paused, peering intently into Kocherov's face, I am sure that Moscow will not be surrendered. What could not be said about the eagle? I couldn't, Shkopinskaya paused. Could not, subjunctive mood. Couldn't, past tense, she smiled bitterly at the corners of her mouth and repeated, something is happening. Klavdia Dmitrievna, are you going to go to defensive work? Of course. But you have hypertension, you can't. From you, Sasha, I did not expect. The teacher shook her head. I thought you maturely assess the situation and understand that now is not the time, and fell silent, as if she had stopped. What are you talking about, Klavdia Dmitrievna? Kocherov was worried. I don't know how obvious this is to others, but, you stayed in the city for a reason, didn't you? Of course, this is a rhetorical question, but think about it. About what? You don't mean to say. The word impossible was uttered by you, reminded Shkopinskaya. I'm talking about something else, just in case. Think about how to make the obvious non-obvious. All armed units, regardless of departmental affiliation. They are at the disposal of the city's defense headquarters. The female voice sounded muffled from the loudspeaker and seemed to be tired. I won't talk to you about the conspiracy for a long time, Ignatov summed up decisively, shifting his gaze from one of his interlocutors, a grey-haired stocky man, to another, a thin intellectual in round glasses. The people themselves are conscious, party members with experience. So why, I say, did you come? Well, listen to the radio. Well, you've heard something that doesn't concern you. How it touches, the first to know, I'll be puzzled. In the meantime. If it's simple, I'm going to have a conversation with you, I was going to anyway. True, for something else. To you, Comrade Georges, this is the question, do you know German? I have one thing for you, on the subject of propaganda and, again, agitation. Half an hour earlier, Mikhail Shurov, quite unexpectedly for himself, ran into Alexander Nikolaevich Komarov, for some reason more often referred to as Zhores, in the corridor of the regional party committee. Suddenly. Yes, what is there? If something has begun, where can people go if not to the regional committee? 3 months ago they were already in this office, then Ignatov talked with them for a long time, in detail, having previously talked with each separately. The director of the 26th school, a disabled civil war, Komarov Zhores, in the event of the occupation of Oral, was to head an underground organization, and the locksmith of the Medvedev plant, Shurov, would become his right hand. Then it seemed, well, this is just in case, well, it can't be that the eagle was handed over. Then I thought otherwise. And suddenly, an appeal on the radio. And you, Mikhail Andreevich, I need you as a specialist. Tekmashovites are now desperately in need of a locksmith. Help your neighbors, huh? Not in service, but in friendship. Now jumped to Potapov. Not only jumped, but also worked half a shift. The second secretary of the regional committee did not exaggerate in the least about to the point. And in the evening I decided to drop in on 2 Anushkas, my sister and niece, in a small private house on Sartko and Vanzetti Street. They must have some news. All vehicles of enterprises and the population, up to bicycles of adult samples, are declared requisitioned and must be handed over for defense needs. Anna Andreevna Davydenko straightened up, resting her stiff back. Where could they go? Socks? Always kept in the bottom drawer of the chest of drawers. And warm handkerchiefs tied in a knot along with several pieces of tar soap, so that the moth would not start, should have been found on the mezzanine. Anna Andreevna determined the place of everything once and for all. The brother said, neat, and the daughter called this property of character the word pedantry read in some book. But now, okay, socks, but where did you put the handkerchiefs? Just had it in my hands. She complained. Well, everything just falls out of hand. How am I past? Mikhail Andreevich grinned, shifting the bundles to the side and sitting down on the edge of the sofa. Do you collect Anyutka? And who else? She ran in an hour ago. She says they are still evacuating them. You need at least some warm clothes. And eat something to make home. She promised to come, but she doesn't know when. Yes, you sit a little, do not flicker. And then you get completely lost, you won't find yourself. In which case we will take it ourselves. Why go to Volodaka? I'm restless, Mish, Anna Andreevna admitted. Anushka for the first time from home. Why is it unsettling? You're sending her to evacuation, not to the front. Yes, you know, I'm calmer when we are all together, the woman sighed, paused. Well, where, after all, are the socks? Mish, here's another thing I think, we need to hand in Anushkin's bike right today, otherwise who knows what will happen tomorrow. To the soldiers of the Red Army and the inhabitants of the city of Oral and the Oriel region. Comrades, the situation on the Soviet-German front in some areas has become more complicated over the past day. There are breakthroughs of the front line by enemy units. There is an immediate threat to the city. Anna woke up. It turns out that you can fall asleep not just standing up, on the go. She leaned against the wall for a moment, so as not to drop the box of medicines, and fell asleep. It's good that the loudspeaker spoke just above the ear. Her daily duty was coming to an end when the head nurse hurried down the corridor, calling the staff to a meeting as she went. The meeting was more like a briefing and lasted 15 minutes, no more. And then preparations began for the evacuation of the hospital. And then the cars came. Phew, just 2. And Klavochka, when they carried out the bedridden ones, twisted her leg. Or was it the second flight? Everything is mixed up in my head. But Galka dropped the Bix with dressing material exactly in the second. We must go, otherwise the hands are weakening, no matter how. Commander of the Orlovsky defensive area, Senior Major of State Security Godunov. So it turned, the heavy wheel of history. And fate began to change. And how do you know what will change in them? In that former story, Zina Vorogashina was supposed to leave Oral tomorrow in the direction of Ilyets. Not forever, no. But the way back for her, the political instructor of the Dzerzhinsky detachment, ran through partisan forests and through a hospital in Tashkent. And then there would be long years of work in the organs, retirement, and a modest post of caretaker in the Oriel Museum of Local Law, the same museum where the Turgenev Hall operated during the years of occupation. Decorator Sasha Kocherov, an underground worker from Valia Berzin's group, managed to achieve its discovery. And the teacher Klavdia Dmitrievna Shkopinskaya was in charge of the hall. Sasha survived the occupation and died at the front. Alexander Nikolaevich Komarov, who had called himself Zhores since the civil day, led another group. And in the fall of the 42nd year, he was shot along with Mikhail Shurov and his other comrades. Anna Andreevna Davydenko, the owner of the safe house of the Georgians, and her daughter Anya, a nurse in the underground hospital, otherwise known as the Russian hospital, managed to survive. To share the fate of other survivors, to keep the memory. Still, it is wisely arranged that people do not know their fate. But now their fates have changed. And how do you know? Chapter 12. September 30, 1941, Dmitrovsk-Orlovsky area. The area around Dmitrovsk is not at all the same as the typical Oriel landscape. Neighborhood Orel, a saucer. Given the circumstances under which Fast Heinz acquired the city, one is tempted to add something that has taken root and has become popular, with a blue border. And flavor it even more popular, but with a C bend. But the district of Dmitrovsk is a Menesnitsa. Ravines, beams, hills. And forests, which in the near future will become partisans. There is no alternative here. Godunov imagined the local relief even without a topographic map. Uncle Boris, a friend of his father, had relatives here. So the three of them went to Uncle Borya's car not even for 7 miles of jelly to slurp, but for 100 years. I remember that on Sankin's first visit to Dmitrovsk, the Jigul got stuck in a deep puddle right at the entrance to the city. And it got bogged down so well, neither forward nor backward. And the younger Godunov, watching from the side of the attempt to pull out the car, then laughed, "Why, maybe we can go fishing right here and get settled?" For which he caught from his father a completely inedible bream and an order to work not with his tongue, but with his hands. We fished on the river Narusa. Sanka was always curious, where did the Russian river get such a name from? But no one really could explain. And only the ancient, pre-ancient grandfather of Uncle Borya, only taking pity on the stubborn kid, gave his explanation. Here you see, small, what a squiggle, a lot of non-Russians came to us. Who settled, but married ours, and began to rob bread, he became his own. And who restlessly guested and stayed away, here is God, and here is the threshold. Sanka would have doubted his grandfather's explanation, but it was very good. Correct, but not like in a book, but humanly. An unknown horsemen were drawn in Sanka's imagination that they turned back from the Narusa River. And fights were invented in which signs of different eras were fancifully mixed. Yes, but no fantasy would be enough to invent what was really happening now. He was going to Dmitrovsk to prepare a hot, downright fiery reception for uninvited guests on Narusa. Swaying gently on the leatherette seat of the Emka, purposefully speeding along the highway, Godunov once again detailed the future for himself. It seems that everything has been thought over, discussed, thought over again, but the feeling that something has been forgotten does not leave. It is interesting how it is in the books of some civilian historian to the marrow of his bones who flounders into the past, and immediately understands what, where, when, with what forces it is necessary to commit. And let's lead. And no one will tell him, sickly, yes, you are crazy, uncle. What kind of 5 artillery regiments do you, to Fritz's mother? Why not just a mechanized corps and a proportional amount of aviation to boot? None. And if difficulties arise, the hitman copes with them famously, to his friends to marvel, to his enemies to fear. Where is the retired captain of the 3rd rank before him? But my father told me, go, Sonia, to the combined arms. Godunov grinned. And thoughts took a different turn. The seat is, of course, not as comfortable as your favorite chair, but the road to reflection predisposes. The wind beats through the half-open window, fresh and damp in the morning, a little like a sea breeze. And not dusty yet, which is also very good. Some ideas are already being implemented, others, those that were smuggled through the afterlife, make you grin again. And at the same time cheer up, so as not to peck your nose. A nuclear bomb on Berlin would be a weighty argument so that Hitler would forget about the Blitzkrieg, but you, Alexander Vasilich, did not fall into a fairy tale. And the third is a matter of the very near future, if only there is enough time, your personal one. If enough is enough, everything is in your hands, the snail of Momishu and Vietnamese mines, and Nerzat's napalm. To progress is to progress from the heart. In the end, the situation is already better than in the story that you know. Eremenko was warned, and the self-styled senior major, but already quite legitimate head of the Orlovskaya defensive region, that's the joke of history, huh? Goes to Dmitrovsk. And in the company not only common sense but crazy ideas. Knowledge is, of course, power, but 11 cars with 1,500 heavily armed NKVD militiamen are somehow more convincing. Another 100 are on their way to Dmitrovsk on a narrow-gauge railway, and with them, explosives and Molotov cocktails. And again the eternal curiosity crept out. I wonder why they still called a completely professional military formation a militia? How would you know better? And you don't have to go far. The junior lieutenant checist, sitting next to Sergeant Demon, knows for sure. But you can't hear. And again, one wonders how it was that in the days of Ivan the Terrible and Peter the Great, no one seemed suspicious to anyone and, as a result, did not end up on a stake or in the dungeons of the secret chancellery. And they even managed to make a career with the persons of the sovereigns, yeah. Here, in your native 20th century, you swim like those fogs over the river. Everything is strange, from household trifles to territorial division. And one must constantly monitor oneself so as not to show surprise when a satellite, for example, reports, "Well, we entered Kursk." And think, why are you so absent-minded, Alexander Light Vasilich? He also noted at the meeting, Dmitrovsk is still part of the Kursk region. However, this is important only to maintain, so to speak, the legend. And it should not affect the violent activity in any way, because in any case, the territory of the Oriel military district, it should not be reflected, and to hell with the sea and land, in the end, both fears and signs. Moreover, the signs are insultingly trivial even in the light of a single fate of a certain Ave Godunov. There are 13 cars in the column. The 13th was a generous parting gift from Ignatov, the party secretary, before departing for Kromy, volunteered to see off the commander himself and his comrades. Well, he presented a gift. And why, one wonders, did Godunov need an obcom propaganda machine and a fat, shaven-headed propaganda brigadier to boot? If only extra, well, that is, not extra wheels? So here, in Orel, they are not superfluous. I'm tearing off a valuable shot from my heart, but you, Ignatov was seriously offended. Do you know how things will go for you in that Dmitrovsk? No. And Nikita Vasilich is an experienced propagandist. If anything, it will push such a river as we, Boots, can't even say. And he has the music with him, he will select the right one, so that, therefore, he will create the right mood. What music, Nikolai? Godunov waved him off irritably. No time for agitation now. Agitation, it is always on time, depending on who, whom and how will agitate. The secretary stubbornly responded. Not every person understands the order, especially if this person is a stubborn woman or grandfather. And these, I'll tell you, in that Dmitrovsk, 50 to 100. And they have kids with them. Imagine what a howl all this guard can raise? Well, they didn't see that German in the eyes, well, perhaps, one of the experienced peasants who drank on the German dashing. But you yourself, probably, will not send these anywhere, huh? That's the same. And our comrade Gorokov, a nod in the direction of the propaganda brigade modestly silent on the sidelines, from that what Maximka, is his best friend. In addition, he personally behind the steering wheel, I assigned their driver to another matter a long time ago. And, catching the incredulous look of the commander, he finished with pressure. Then thank you. He was unaware that at that moment Alexander Vasilievich was not thinking about the propaganda team at all. More precisely, about him, but indirectly. Even the ex-wife, when she was her bride, admired Godunov's ability to think in an original way, as she put it. When, instead of a movie or a dance floor, he took her to the company of unrecognized, both now and, quite obviously, in the future, talents with somehow tuned guitars and strange songs. Then, in the third or fourth year of her family life, she began to say something else. They say, he, Lieutenant Commander Godunov, would be a terrible bore and boring serviceman, if not for the childish tricks that happen from time to time. Well, under the curtain she was annoyed. It seems to be rolling over you, and carrying you. Here and now the thought has rolled, and has incurred. Listen, Comrade Gorokov, do you have records of classical music? What exactly interests you, Comrade Senior Major? He asked somewhat ceremoniously. I have a good home selection. Alexander Vasilievich glanced at Ignatov, a good secretary, but caustic. and instead of answering asked the following question. Is home far away? Karl Liebknecht. Godunov grimaced. The name is familiar, but probably from childhood memories. Here Rosa Luxemburg Street definitely was and is in such an unexpectedly thrown reality, but, we'll turn around on the way, he answered cautiously. Oddly enough, this order was quite acceptable to be taken literally. The name of Liebknecht, it turns out, was borne by Vasilyevskaya, running parallel to Komsomolskaya, along which the column was moving. And Godunov's hope of finding a record with something symphonic and formidable was justified to such an extent that he did not even dare to count on. But all this happened half an hour later. And before that, he had yet another acquaintance, and again at the initiative of the restless Ignatov. Meetings with those whom he knew only from books, Godunov had already ceased to be surprised. Less than a day passed, but it stopped, and that's it. After all, he was not surprised, in fact, when he crossed paths in the service with a former classmate. If people walk along the same paths, there is nothing strange that someday they will meet. Although the meeting with this Madely, in contrast to the acquaintance with Gorokov, impressed me deeply. To begin with, he, Godunov, almost got caught at the School of Firefighters. All the same, whatever one may say, the experience of working as a hitman is damn little. When Ignatov brought a bright-eyed young man of about 30 to him and introduced, Comrade Martinov, an operative worker and generally a reliable person, well, he worked at a firefighter's school, of course, Alexander Vasilievich decided that he had misheard. Well, at least I didn't ask again. Because literally in the next moment I realized, but they work, the laws of hitting described in books work. Some are for sure. I myself, I remember, laughed. Well, modern writers have no imagination. No matter how they undertake to tell why the hero is suddenly all of himself informed, and precisely in those questions that life throws at him after being hit, it certainly turns out that he literally read 1 or 2 books at his leisure just yesterday. Oh, right, people noticed, the one who laughs last laughs best. Going to school for the last time, Godunov left on the kitchen table a book by the grandfather of the Russian Special Forces by Ilya Steranov, Notes of a Saboteur, which he read at breakfast. I stopped just at the chapter about these very firefighters who are actually partisans, and that's it. In fact, a senior major centurial is simply obliged to know such things, so, more than by the way. And Alexander Vasilievich did not fail to impudently demonstrate awareness. And Comrade Rodolfo, by chance, is not found in oral? I caught 2 puzzled looks. Yes, the trick, of course, is childish, to catch up with the fog and appear more knowledgeable than you really are. However, it's not meaningless, it made an impression. Moreover, the risk is 0, in comparison with other risks. Just on these dates, Steranov should be recalled from oral, but what if? Although this, suddenly, is not so friendly, it can turn out to be, Saboteur number 1 is directly subordinate to the headquarters. Steranov is in oral now. No? I left yesterday, replied the party secretary. Comrade Martinov, here he is, and 3 more knowledgeable comrades. I'll take 1, don't blame me, I'll take the rest with you. And Comrade Martinov will be like an orderly with you, do you mind? That's right, Ignatov smiled broadly. My Excellency's adjutant, Alexander Vasilievich chuckled almost imperceptibly. But he did not voice this thought, so as not to provoke the party secretary again. Then you'll say thanks again that I found such an assistant as Matvey Matveich, concluded Ignatov. And when he called Mamley by his first name and patronymic, Godunov suddenly realized, this is a future documentary writer. Are there few Martinovs in Central Russia? But in order for Matvey Matveich. No, for sure, by the will of fate and the party secretary, the best of the researchers in the history of the Oriel Underground was appointed as his companion, whose books Sanka Godunov read in his youth. Writers then seemed to him great sages, almost celestials. And now the real, well, future, writer is swaying on the Emka seat right in front of him and staring around so enthusiastically, as if he sees something significant and beautiful in a boring, to be honest, autumn landscape. But is right, everything has its own attraction in it. This landscape, exists as if out of time and out of space. 100 years ago it was like this and in 100 it will be the same. Do you remember, Matvey Matveyevich? That's right. All of a sudden, a few years later, you want to write a book about everything about this? Martinov turned around. I don't know, Comrade Senior Major. I do not promise. A year ago, I worked as a task correspondent in the Ural region, but it was a turbulent time, he shrugged vaguely. And for some reason I am sure that you will write a book. And not even one. So to speak, immortalize all of us. And today, Godunov smiled. And he also began to look, what if he manages to spot a clear sign of the times? So I did not look out for anything, except that the power line poles and telephone poles were wooden. Yes, after all, until you find yourself in a situation where time is a matter of life and death, you will not fully appreciate such a conquest of progress as a telephone. The first secretary of the Dmitrovsky District Committee was awakened by a night call, and now, hopefully, there is a big emergency in the city and combat alert, to stand in your places, for an urgent dive. Judging by the telephone conversation, Fedor Syotkin is a quick-witted and active man. It seems that in that reality he led a partisan detachment. Surely Godunov did not remember, but, logically, this should have happened. And yet, Alexander Vassilievich did not say too much, limiting himself to instructions with which it was impossible to delay. And not only because the habit of not saying anything important on the phone was hammered in at the level of reflexes. You can't control human reactions over the phone, let alone face to face. And then what was to be done could cause a reaction, ambiguous, up to an insistent desire to contact the higher party leadership. And then everything could end before it began. Still, it's annoying that you have to think not only about business, but also about how not to get burned out of stupidity. Damn annoying. But you can fall asleep on a lot of things, starting with a word that they still don't know here, they don't know. Speaking of words and phones, first of all, planes. That is, upon arrival, it will be necessary to find out how things are going with Odin. Odintsova, from what secret closet of consciousness did this schoolboy habit of hanging nicknames stick its nose out? But what, the one-eyed Odin, he is Odin, a kind of Aryaslavich type, where are all the escheated true Aryans like Hitler and Goebbels before him? And to create superhuman to this Odin, he does not like, but he will have to. The history of aviation was never listed among Godunov's main interests. If he pulled something out of the books he read, then out of the corner of his consciousness, not otherwise. I vaguely remembered, the famous night witches would become a mass phenomenon a little later, but for now, female pilots are as rare as female tankers throughout military history. Remembered correctly. When at the meeting Odintsov said, there are planes, at the very least I will find technicians, in the appropriate number, no, but to complete the task you have set, yes, and repeated, but we don't have pilots. Godunov had to voice the lying, it would seem, on the surface, the thought of Aero Club girls. He said, and saw on the face of the military commissar a shadow of fatigue, which does not happen even from the hardest work. It is immediately clear, Odintsov stepped on a pet peeve. Surely those girls besieged the military registration and enlistment office in the summer, demanding to be sent to the front. What can they girls do? Take off landing? And the sky is clear, like an elegant blue dress? And on Earth there are only two troubles, a strict instructor and a grumpy mechanic? Something like this Odintsov answered, only the wording was dry, chaste. Even when the newly made commander of the Ural Defensive Region briefly outlined his plan, the face of the military commissar did not brighten up. But Odin grabbed the idea with the dexterity of a true professional. And Godunov's heart was relieved. Firstly, the pro not only did not reject the risky idea, but also began to clarify the details. No, well, am I not well done? Alexander Vassilievich mentally praised himself with a grin. If there was time, I would definitely rest on my laurels, otherwise I would have to be content with a sofa in Obolensky's office. And secondly, just ordering is sometimes also very difficult. But now is not the time for abstract philosophy. Starting to discuss the plan of the commander, the military commissar shared responsibility with him. And it's not at all the question that he formally divided. Godunov was in no position to worry about details. No, Odin shared moral responsibility with him. What the hell you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy? Okay. If only everything worked out as planned. Odintsov is already in action. Comrade he, around the insight, resolute. And again, unexpectedly, uninvitedly, the same accursed question appeared, did all of them, active and resolute, really need a kick from outside, so as not to sit and wait for the weather by the sea, but at least to take the most obvious? Historians, over there, write, in the first period of the war, many, whom you can't suspect in cowardice and fear of taking responsibility, were confused. Even those who stood higher and, as a result, had more authority, blundered, did not use their full potential. But are they great? Are your possibilities, hey, Alexander Light Vasilich? Here's the same thing. Local historian Ovsyannikov correctly said, in order to judge such things, one must experience them in one's own skin. You also have an advantage, which, probably, no one else has. You know how everything will end. And yet, the rats are the first to leave the ship, and the captain is the last to leave, when the waves are already overflowing the combing of the navigation bridge, and not a minute earlier. Or doesn't leave at all. Unless, of course, this is a Russian captain. Dark power lines. And further, deeper, even darker pines, trunks with a lilac tint, and almost black needles. And in 20, and in 50, and in 70 years, pines will grow on this earth. But for some reason, it is when you look at them that you feel most acutely that you are in a different time. In your time, you had nothing to lose but your own life. However, she was not in danger. But somehow you felt doomed. And here, this is not a fantasy, and you are most likely really doomed, but there is no this foul state of confusion of being lost. You have more to lose than. And here are your milestones, Alexander Vasilich, power line poles. Godunov himself barely noticed how he began to count them, and woke up, poking his forehead into Martinov's back. Sergeant Demon stood nearby and looked guilty. Godunov opened the door a crack and looked out, already intuitively guessing what he would see. Well, that's how it is. The Amka plunged into a puddle for a good 2/3 of the wheel. And some buildings loomed on the horizon. Deja vu however. No, have you come? That's right, Comrade Senior Major, Martinov answered, and with a restrained sigh he cautiously got out of the car. Only then Alexander Vasilievich realized that the phrase turned out to be meaningful, and clarified. In Dmitrovsk, I say, are we entering? That's right, the Chekist repeated. This time there was no need to work hard, the car was quickly pushed out of the puddle by the fighters who arrived in time. Here it is, the advantage of official position, Godunov chuckled. Ahead was the city, where they had to experience the hardships of the position assigned to themselves. Dmitrovsk 41st seemed to Godunov the same as Dmitrovsk at the turn of the 70s and 80s. Of course, if Alexander Vasilievich was local, he would have easily found the traditional 10 differences, or maybe more, and with sadness or joy he stated the absence or presence of signs dear to the heart. However, for an outsider, this city looked like countless small settlements in which, as they would write in a guidebook, the 19th century coexisted with the 20th. Neighbored, but not in the same way as in the cities of the Golden Ring, which Godunov somehow traveled around during his vacation. There, the neighborhood is thought out, like laying out exhibits in a museum. Here, as God puts on the soul. Probably, this also has its own charm, but I just don't want to think about it at all. And, alas, not at all because of some aesthetic predilections. If everything goes like this as it should be, soon there will be little left. If only the local authorities did not balk. The thing is, it will be done in any case, but there will be disproportionately more problems in the process. And the local authorities here, apparently, are poor. Talking to Fedosyotkin on the phone, Godunov for some reason pictured in his imagination a middle-aged, but quick-witted peasant, someone like Kovpak. Thanks to the connection, the receiver hooted and hummed, reliably masking the age of the interlocutor. And Alexander Vasilievich was quite surprised when Fedosyotkin called himself a strong-built guy of about 25 in a jacket without insignia and civilian cut-in black trousers with a smart slouchy tucked into slightly dusty commander's boots. Eyes reddened from lack of sleep, but the look is tenacious in a good way. And the manner of presenting information is more like a report than the habit of civilians to voice the essence mixed with their own thoughts and a bunch of completely unnecessary considerations now. In half an hour, the inhabitants of the city will gather in the central square. Komsomol members and pioneers were attracted for notification. Telephone messages have been sent to the MTS of the district, fuel should be expected from hour to hour. The train has been prepared, the schedule has been agreed. Militia fighters are sent to clear and engineer a field northeast of the city. He reported, and looked directly, inquiringly, what, they say, is all this? And to that, dear comrade Fedosyotkin, that in the story that is known to him, Godunov, Guderian's tanks should enter Dmitrovsk by tomorrow evening. If the conversation with Eremenko resonates as it should, then they have plenty of time left. Almost a whole day. This is a lot, without any irony and other sarcasm. In the current conditions, when the situation is developing directly according to the classic, we just have to stand the night and hold out the day, a lot. The classic, by the way, obviously knew what he was talking about. And Lilyashenko and Kartukov had enough time for a comparable period of time to deploy defenses in the Mtsensk area. However, this is not the example that can now be used. And you have to answer. Briefly, clearly and, if possible, inspiring. I will say without circumlocution, Comrade Fedosyotkin. Kutuzov during the Yona gave Moscow to save Russia. We have to give up Dmitrovsk in order to save Moscow. On the face of the secretary while bewilderment was read only. It's good that he didn't rush to protest. And not just to give, well, that is, not for nothing at all. So we quickly form, so to speak, a committee for a solemn meeting, and stand in our places, weigh anchor. We include you, Comrade Martinov, Comrade Nefedov, in the committee, and nod towards the Frontier Guard, commander of the NKVD militia, and in absentia, Oriel military commissar Comrade Odintsov. You can, at your discretion, replenish the committee with responsible workers. The primary task is the urgent evacuation of the civilian population. How many people are there in Dmitrovsk now? In total, about 6,000, the secretary answered quickly. Local, about 5, the rest were evacuated. Police? Militia? Railway workers, including pensioners? Doctors? Some figures Fedosyotkin named on the move, without hesitation, with accuracy, others, without breaking or repairing, approximately, and promised to clarify. Well, you yourself, up to this moment, what were you going to do when the enemy approaches? Godunov threw a provocative question. As planned. Gathered, and in Druzhensky woods, again without delay the secretary answered. It's a good thing. Just have to wait. To what extent, life will show. That's it, secretary, let's go to the rally, then we'll agree on the rest, as they say, in working order. The area was predictably small, almost square in shape. The monument to Lenin is not as pompous as Godunov had ever seen even in remote regional centers. Nearby, a wooden tribune is knocked together, hung with a darkened red cloth. They were renovating, I suppose, even when the first mobilized were seen off, Alexander Vasilievich thought with some indistinct anguish. People have already gathered. They gathered and waited. On the square, on the streets adjacent to it. No one tried to leave, unless, seeing one of their relatives or friends, they moved closer. At the same time, they did not push or swear. No one tried to take a seat near the podium or hide in a secluded corner where you can get bored or take a nap. It can be seen literally at a glance. Others say, people are the same at all times. Hell no. People who understand that, as the grandmother used to say, it smells like kerosene, differ from the people who came to the solemn meeting more strikingly than the latter, from the people who gathered at the rock concert. There was an even rumble over the square. For some reason everyone was talking in a low voice. And they fell silent as if on command, as soon as Godunov put his foot on the bottom step of the staircase leading to the podium. Alexander Vasilievich, accustomed over the past couple of years to the lightweight silence that hung not even on a thread, on a cobweb, could not help but be surprised. Heavy silence, but held securely, as if on a steel cable. All you can hear is how the boards that have dried up over the summer creak underfoot, and a kid of 5 years old, standing next to the podium, whimperingly draws. Mom, zai up go. Let's go homo. What are you going to say here? What and how to do without additional complications, plus those that will inevitably arise anyway? How to convince these grandfathers, who, I suppose, have lived all their lives in Dmitrovsk without getting out, these women, covering their children from the wind, that they need to leave the house, having lost everything they acquired at once, and go the hell where, into the unknown and disorder? Okay, as it will affect, so it will affect. Let's hope that people who are not accustomed to constantly changing colorful impressions are more receptive, though probably less gullible. Aha. Godunov, with slight bewilderment, looked at the cylindrical contraption, fixed on the edge of the podium, but nothing. This weight should be in close combat. A bale on the top of the head, and there is no cook. And, somehow not at all solidly clearing his throat and leaning a little towards the microphone, started. Comrades. I am speaking to you on behalf of the command of the Oriel defensive region. And he barely recognized his own voice, grinding from 2 loudspeakers. He took into account the mistake, and then he spoke from the height of his growth. In any case, it's never Molotov or Leviton, but at least it's tolerable for the ears. And, most importantly, the words suddenly began to come by themselves, without effort. I will not hide, the situation for all of us is extremely serious. The enemy is rushing towards Moscow. Dmitrovsk is at the cutting edge of the main attack. But we have the opportunity to act ahead of the curve. Be that as it may, if not today, then tomorrow in the city, on these streets, on this square, in your houses, hostilities will begin. In this regard, the entire civilian population is subject to immediate evacuation. Phew, the main thing has been said. The silence became unsteady, like mercury, labored breathing, barely audible sobs. People heard, but probably did not fully believe it yet. Well, instructions in such a state of mind are perceived, as a rule, from and to. The consciousness needs to cling to something. The command gives you 2 hours from the end of the rally to get ready. Take documents, money, valuables, warm clothes, food supplies for 3 days with you. Drinking water will be provided on the train. A short look at Fedosyotkin. The secretary nods. I understand, they say, we will do it. Most of you are civilians. But do not think that if you decide to stay, the war will not affect you. You listen to the reports of the Soviet Information Bureau and know what atrocities Hitler's soldiers are committing. Their goal is the conquest of Russia and the destruction of the Soviet people. Your first priority is to keep your children alive. They say that fear and hope are the main psychological levers that set a person in motion. If so, then you need to use them. Well, after you are taken to the rear, you will be provided with work and supplies with things and products. I am sure that you will work honestly, helping to forge victory at the front and the speedy defeat of the enemy. Remember, you are not refugees. You are leaving the combat zone by direct order of the command of the Oriel Defensive Region. Godunov drew more air into his lungs and concluded. And one more thing, if someone wishes to stay, it will be regarded as a conscious intention to stay in the territory that can be captured by the enemy, and be punished according to the laws of war. He said and thought, I wonder if this is how stories about the cannibalistic essence of the bloody Jebny are born? Physicians of all specialties, mechanics, drivers, tractor drivers, builders, who do not have children under the age of 16 in the care, are declared mobilized. Immediately after the end of the rally, they should arrive at the district committee of the party for registration and briefing. Looks like he's said enough. Well, it's time to wrap up, so that later you don't suffer from the anecdotal question, but did I blurt something extra? This is also strange. Everything that needed to be said on the case and in fact was said as if by itself, and at the final phrase you stumbled like a schoolboy who forgot a line of rhyme. The bureaucratic and now the floor is given to Comrade Fedosyotkin and the slogan, the enemy will be defeated, victory will be ours. Death to the German invaders. The first is too unsightly, the second is too sublime. And Alexander Vassilievich preferred to simply step aside, letting the secretary of the district committee to the microphone. Fedosyotkin was not shy about slogans. The war demands from all Soviet people unprecedented efforts and unprecedented hardships. But that's why they are Soviet people, to overcome everything and create a bright communist future for their children. In the meantime, everyone, both at the front and in the rear, must become a soldier. The enemy will be defeated, victory will be ours. In the lips of the secretary, these words sounded without pathos, naturally and convincingly. And they had confidence, such boundless, transcendent confidence that everything will be fine, which only young people have. Knowing the value of their words. But never paid in full. However, Godunov could not help but see the faces of those who were standing at the very podium. The woman hugging the capricious 5-year-old had the pained fold at her lips smoothed out. The old man stopped shaking his head in dismay. The teenage girl with a pioneer tie loosened over her jacket looked at Fedosyotkin with adoration. Only come on, comrades, don't stuff your suitcases with good things, said the secretary in such a tone as if he were talking with people face to face in his office, and not standing in front of the square. And don't drag the beast with you, anyway, we won't allow it to be taken into the car. So this is how, first of all, the residents of collective and workers' peasants leave, arriving at the station in an hour, that is, at 10:30, followed by from Communist and Krasny Lane, arriving at 12:30. If only to be in time, Godunov suppressed a sigh. Everything, good luck. And see you soon, concluded Fedosyotkin. Well done you, secretary. Alexander Vassilievich mentally admired. I wanted to repeat it aloud, but I didn't have time. the first bars of the Holy War sounded over the square in the rhythm of marching footsteps. And Gorokov did a good job too. If he is just as quick with a machine gun. Fedosyatkin's promptness turned out to be generally beyond praise. Godunov was still descending from the podium, and the secretary was already talking to some grey-haired man in glasses and a wrinkled jacket. He ordered to give the evacuees food from the food warehouses at the rate of so and so much per person. Distribution should be organized directly at the station. But how can I? He began to lament right off the bat. Carry something on what? Your truck was still alive last night, healthy and not coughing. Fedosyatkin cut him off. What kind of ailment happened to him today? As for the drape, not the one that matter, are you worried? So I personally organize it for you. You are not subject to mobilization in any queue. I have already studied your entire medical record with your own efforts up and down when you were fussing about vouchers. Just do it first, and do it right. It's clear and understandable to you that we won't put everyone in the squad at once. Here's how to arrange transportation. I will give you as many people as you want for loading and unloading. Do you give me the norm for an adult? Frowning, the interlocutor of the secretary muttered. And what about children? Listen, Mikhail Sergeyevich. Fedosyatkin switched to the sincere you, and Godunov thought with surprise, if not for the lush hair, the grey-haired one would be the double of the last general secretary. No one will ask you for an extra kilogram of sausage today. And he won't ask for 10. Neither today nor tomorrow. You cannot breed any bureaucracy. My calculation is simple, so that there is enough for everyone and no one for us, and for you, Sergeyek. Personally, I was not offended. And, showing that the conversation was over, he turned to a woman who looked like a teacher in a strict dress. Well, yours, Efrosinya Stepanovna, is a well-known business, to feed the newcomers with lunch and dinner. We are sending you Daria, so you will have to ask a comrade senior lieutenant for a couple of fighters to help you. Daria, of course, worked for 3, but I'm afraid they won't give us 3, and turned around, looking for Nefedov with his eyes. And he met the eyes of the commander, boyishly embarrassed. I'm sorry, comrade senior major. Why are they suddenly to blame? Godunov was cheerfully surprised. Why aren't you waiting for special orders? I'm out of the habit, Fedosyatkin admitted, almost without hiding that he was pleased with the praise that sounded in the commander's tone. When 20,000 evacuees arrive in the area in a month, somehow you no longer wait until the thunder breaks out. Alexander Vasilievich mechanically glanced at the clearing sky. God forbid that the thunder struck at the scheduled time. Let's go, secretary, to clarify the details. The unusually tart tea and the unusually strong cigarettes made my throat hurt. Or maybe it blew in the car. You are wrong, nevertheless, a hit man, Alexander Vasilich. Boring. You are not in a hurry to make progress, nor are you rushing to Comrade Stalin in order to boast of an afterthought. He didn't even quail Vysotsky, he slipped his schoolboy scribbles instead of the lines of a brilliant poet to Ignatov. And instead of performing feats, you sit for yourself, you sit, that is, you sit. With difficulty, you build a simple multi-move. Simple, because the available forces are not enough. 250 NKVD militiamen, those who arrived by rail also immediately joined in the stormy activity, carefully directed by Nefedov and Martinov and the director of the timber industry Jarakov, and 150 local people. These are the classic militia, old and young. There are even 4 girls, 3 nurses and a paramedic. One thing pleases, the region is hunting, among the peasants, read, all have double-barreled shotguns in the corners, and they do not gather dust idle. Okartnikov, to Sergeant Somov, recommended by Nefedov as the best shooter, let it be determined who is really a virtuoso, and who scares away hares in the surrounding forests. The rest had lunch, thanks to Efrosinya Stepanovna, and again moved into the field. Do not reap or plow before winter, but build a jump airfield. Gorokov, still in oral, who fully understood the role assigned to him in the upcoming events, took 2 amateur radio guys to help and began to perform the priesthood. Who is really a virtuoso, and who scares away hares in the surrounding forests? The rest had lunch, thanks to Efrosinya Stepanovna, and again moved into the field. Do not reap or plow before winter, but build a jump airfield. Gorokov, still in oral, who fully understood the role assigned to him in the upcoming events, took 2 amateur radio guys to help and began to perform the priesthood. Who is really a virtuoso, and who scares away hares in the surrounding forests? The rest had lunch, thanks to Efrosinya Stepanovna, and again moved into the field. Do not reap or plow before winter, but build a jump airfield. Gorokov, still in Oral, who fully understood the role assigned to him in the upcoming events, took 2 amateur radio guys to help and began to perform the priesthood. But most of the work fell to the lot of Fedosyatkin, who fully justified the reputation already established in the eyes of the commander. Alexander Vasilievich noticed a long time ago, an acute situation in people with leadership abilities spurs creative thinking. And so spurring that thoughts rush right off the bat. The secretary, having barely heard the details of the plan, was so excited about the idea that he proposed to improve it in the direction of even greater fire hazard. Martinov picked up the idea and creatively developed. School of Firefighters, to be sure. In general, there were no problems with assistants. Almost all senior officials, whether they were directors of enterprises or members of the district committee, were going to remain in any eventuality. It was determined in advance that they would form the core of the partisan detachment. And the option of destroying the equipment of enterprises and manufactured, but not exported products, as it turned out, was discussed in a narrow circle. So to speak, hypothetically. Well, very hypothetically, that is, it was necessary to assume, at least just logically, but no one believed that it would come to this. It is against human nature to sit and think about how you will destroy what you have created with your own hands. And there is something to burn in the city. Hemp fiber, ropes, paper, wood. Godunov shrugged his shoulders shiveringly and reached for a glass of hot tea. Thinking about different options for resolving the situation is a good exercise for the mind. Only now he, Godunov, will have to immediately participate in the Olympic Games and by all means take a place on the podium. Who will plant him? He is a monument. With a sad irony, the subconscious gave out quickly for associations. Godunov stroked his face with an effort. He glanced at Fedosyatkin, who was studying the map spread out on the table with tired detachment. Let's go, Andrei Dmitrievich, let's unwind, evaluate the work of our field-growing team, and at the same time we'll drop by the station. Tomorrow morning, a specialist will come to inspect us, and we can't lose face in any way. If he approves, then we will pass a more severe test. From the book by Matvey Martinov, In the Days of Severe Trials. Chekists in the Battles in the Oriel Region, Tula, Prioksky Book Publishing House, 1972, 2nd edition. In those days when the armored monsters of Guderian, one of the most famous Nazi generals, rushed to the heart of our motherland, every day decided a lot. It was necessary to detain the enemy on the distant approaches to Moscow. The front demanded reserves, and the Oriel military district fulfilled this task with honor. The 20th Army, the 258th Rifle Division and more than 20 marching battalions were formed on Oriel land. In addition, about 130,000 Olivites worked on the construction of the defensive lines of the Bryansk front. In the second half of August, a division of the Operational and Training Center of the Western Front was formed in Orel, a partisan school, which, for the purpose of conspiracy, was called the School of Firefighters. A legendary countryman Ilya Grigorievich Steranov, who had already fought against the Brown Plague in Spain, participated in its creation. Party organs sent staunch communists, Komsomol members and non-party patriots to the school as instructors and cadets. The names of many of them are now known throughout the country. The name of a true patriot, Senior Major of State Security Godunov, is inscribed in golden letters in the history of the Great Patriotic War. Like his friend I.G. Steranov, A.V. Godunov was among the Soviet military specialists who provided international assistance to the heroic Spanish Republicans, and from the first days of the Great Patriotic War he was in those sectors of the national struggle where his knowledge, his experience, his outstanding organizational skills and personal courage were most needed. Always self-possessed, calm, reasonable, Alexander Vasilievich was invariably tactful with those around him, even in difficult situations without losing his presence of mind, and the way he spoke, somewhat surprising the listeners, betrayed his origin. His father and grandfather taught in rural schools, bringing to the peasant masses not only education but also revolutionary ideas. These ideas were brought to the Baltic Fleet during the years of Tsarism by the young Alexander Godunov, shoulder to shoulder with his comrades from the first days of October, who stood up for the defense of the young Soviet Republic. When an immediate threat loomed over our city, the headquarters of the Supreme High Command sent Comrade Godunov to Orel, endowing him with special powers. The next morning, the inhabitants of the areas located on the territory of the Oriel Military District were announced the creation of the Oriel Defense Region. A.V. Godunov assumed the difficult duties of a commander in the most difficult conditions. There were not enough fighters, weapons, and ammunition. But the communist Godunov, firmly remembering the words of Comrade Stalin that there are no fortresses in the world that the Bolsheviks could not take, was sure that the Bolsheviks could turn any city into a fortress. On the afternoon of September 30, 1941, he and a detachment of Chekists arrived in Dmitrovskolovsky, where in just a few days they were to detain the armored Nazi hordes. Chapter 13. September 30th to October 1st, 1941, Oral. Higher and higher and higher. We strive for the flight of our birds, yeah. Right now, running and skipping. Who strives for flight, and who, with these same birds, intercourse in a particularly perverted form, ears in oil, nose in grease, but on the other hand, in the air fleet. So he used to say for a long time, even before the war, describing the future of negligent cadets, Fedor Ivanovich, a bore and foul-mouthed, but a real military pilot, albeit in the past, but now he is an excellent instructor and just a good person. Therefore, the authorities forgave him everything, and the female cadets were simply in love with him. And she, Marinka, also, well, just a little. As for being rude, that won't scare her away. All my life next to the railroad, and they can say even worse, especially if you turn up under a hot hand. For the umpteenth time in recent weeks, the instructor's sarcastic saying came to mind, and again it became insulting to tears. None of what she received at the 32nd school helped her, they said, in one of the best in the city. Secondary education, no perseverance in the classroom, and as many as 8 hours of flight time at the Oso-Aviakomovsky Flying Club, where I was lucky enough to take to the skies for the first time. Because the tired, as if to everything in the world already indifferent military commissar once and for all determined Marinka's fate. Without the order of women, yes, what women? Snotty girls. He started coughing and cut off with anger, in short, I will not let you into battle. And no one will let you in. At least come to me with the secretary of the district committee of the Komsomol. He already knew, for sure he knew that the district committee was closed, some at the front, some in the fighter detachment. Well, yes, Marinka herself is not born with a bast. All that she managed to achieve during her 40th daily visit was the first and only sympathetic look and signature on the application for voluntary entry into the Red Army Air Force. She immediately sensed the trick. And I got it right. Marina Polinina did not get a fast fighter, or a formidable bomber, or even a slow transporter. And she got a service in the Airfield Service Company in her dear Oral, and the unexpected joys of repairing the U-2 flying clubs, worn out by generations, and the UT-2, a little less exhausted by life. What to hide, the tricks of the company woods also got. Although they gathered more and more sedate, family-like people, however, there were those who liked to ride about the diminutiveness of Marinka's body subtraction and the awkwardness in working with the entrusted material. Although Polinina was the only girl in the company, she did not happen to hear any smut, first of all, due to the fact that the reserve uncles had heard about her military registration and enlistment office ordeals and were imbued with respect for the stubbornness of that small-caliber girl. In addition, Igor Permanov, a Red Army soldier already born in 1902, a former Chown member, a member of the Civil War, who drove a lot of Korchi gangs in the liberated Transcaucasia and Basmachi in Turkestan, took on something like patronage over Marina. It just so happened that the commissioned from Wounded, a former fighter of a special squadron, settled in Oral, where he got a job as a greaser on a piece of iron. There he became friends with Marina's father, also a former machine gunner of the 3 International Armored Train Team of the 11th Red Army. With the beginning of the war, the old soldier obtained a medical re-examination at the Military Registration and Enlistment Office, and, in the end, was recognized as partially fit for health and subject to conscription in the rear unit. The closest airfield service company to the city became such a unit. So Marina, under the paternal control of an old family friend, felt like she was in the bosom of a cancelled comrade of Christ. Although her colleagues laughed at her, especially on the first day, Marinka was not that offended. She saw herself in the mirror, but how? And I understood, it's hard to hold back a smile when you see a kind of thin doll dressed in a tunic, where you can put a fist between the collar and neck, and put both legs at once into each leg of protective trousers. At the captor, she found only the size of a cap with an asterisk in soldier's underwear, 2 pairs of coarse calico shirts with men's underpants. Items of a lady's toilet, as he immediately warned with deliberate severity, were not provided for by the concept of the clothing supply of the Red Army. Marinka did not argue, although she knew that uniform dresses and skirts were on the supply. But this is for the command staff. And she, the Red Army soldier Polinina, did not come out for a dress, and there were simply no skirts in the warehouse. However, Marina quickly coped with bringing the uniform into a divine form. For 2 evenings, by the light of a kerosene stove, she ripped, sewed in, and smoothed her soldiers' clothes with a primitive ruble. Even the dimensionless old-style work overalls with black bone buttons on her figure no longer looked like a parachute sagging on a birch tree, but looked quite neat. Here are just shoes. Although the Red Army is strong, although glorious, although it has a lot of planes, tanks, guns, it still lacks state-owned shoes for the foot of number 32. The smallest boots that the captain managed to find turned out to be 38th and looked on Murren's legs like half-meter toy cruisers sold in Promptovary before the war. You can't run in these, you can't march, it's like 2 irons shuffle their soles. And even if you hurt yourself into a cake, even roll into a pancake, there is no one on the airfield who owns the art of shoemaking. There is no one to help Marina in such a trouble. That's why at first the Red Army soldier Polinina, with the permission of the company commander, of course, during off-duty hours, wore canvas t-shirts, in which she appeared at the military registration and enlistment office. Alas, there are no eternal things. So it's not surprising that by the end of September the girl's shoes completely fell apart. It's surprising that this did not happen earlier. Especially, autumn, damp, cold, dreary. That's why the volunteer Polinina, born in 1919, went on a war crime, for which, in wartime, she was in big trouble, arbitrarily leaving the location of the unit, or, speaking it simple, having dumped into a self-propelled gun. It seemed, so what? There are only a few kilometers from the airfield to the house. In an hour and a half, run along the familiar roadside, well-groomed, well-worn during classes at the flying club, from the bottom of the chest to get soft festive goat boots, an inheritance from the late grandmother, change shoes, take with you some more underwear, soap, a round box of tooth powder and a jar of shoe polish. And at the same fast pace they will return home even before the fighter on the nightstand yells at the entire barracks, "Arrêtez! Fall! We are building business something." But, as the progressive writer Leo Tolstoy reminded, it was smooth on paper, but they forgot about the ravines. In a word, when Marinka, jingling with the steel horseshoes of her softest festive boots, was already running out onto the last street, silhouettes with rifles emerged from the darkness towards her. Commandant's patrol. Your documents. Well, what are the documents? Not the old days, when every soldier had a book of a Red Army soldier with him. Now everyone is on the lists of the personnel of the unit. And Marina does not have a dismissal note. Where? Yes, and it would be invalid after the official lights out. Having sharply turned around, Polinina jerked to run. Fortunately, all the surrounding dead-end alleys were familiar to her from childhood. And was not there. The patrolman's strong fingers gripped the neck of the shoulder bag, with a strong jerk almost knocking her over on her back. Where? Well, stand. The garrison guardhouse is a dull and unpleasant place. And when there are 3 of all the passengers there, and you, girl, are sitting in an individual room, at the usual time intended for command personnel who have made a mistake, then it's boring to the dog's anguish. Do not consider stupid stepping and crawling under the command of an angry junior sergeant leaning on a knotty stick with brand new black buttonholes of a tankman on a faded third-term tunic and a purple, freshly healed scar on his cheek, not to be considered entertainment. Well, and household chores, where without them? Bulkhead in a frozen concrete warehouse of huge piles of dirty potatoes, washing walls and floors in the premises of the commandant's office and guardhouse, stupefying pumping out water from the emergency sewer. Nothing, I tell you, inspiring. 2 days in the guardhouse for Marinka dragged on like 2 years. On the evening of the 3rd, instead of receiving the proper dinner, she was taken to an office with walls sheathed in dark lath, where, after asking a few questions about her service, education, origin and even the experience of raids in the flying club, she was handed over from hand to hand to an unfamiliar captain with native aviation buttonholes on an overcoat smelling of a specific amber of a hospital warehouse. And now the Red Army soldier Polinina is again at his airfield. Only now, not as an airfield attendant, but as a full-fledged, albeit absolutely green pilot. And together with her, 5 more girls from flying clubs act in this role, 4 from Oriel and 1 evacuated from Minsk back in June. They are commanded by an undertreated Captain Polvoy and a veteran of the Civil and Imperialist Wars, a 48-year-old Red military pilot Selezin, who has not passed certification for conferring a military rank, but proudly sparkling with a paint badge that stands out on a worn leather jacket. Moreover, the navigators are the same former flying clubs, only they did not fly even 3 hours each. theorists, so to speak. Their task is to follow the landmarks, plot a course and throw all the explosive stuffing on the heads of the Nazis. Which one will be able to load the planes? Plus, the mechanics and the armed forces. That's the whole freshly formed light bomber squadron, which for the time being reports directly to the defense headquarters. Although Polvoy frowns, which squadron? And he adds, what a squadron, such a material. True, this is not material at all, but sheer mockery. 5 flying clubs, patched before the war, U-2s with long-ended engines, and 3 new aircraft, UT-2, under the fuselage of each of which craftsman mechanics managed to adapt a suspension bracket for a 100-kilogram FAB and were wiser with a free car, trying to figure out how to fit at least one course machine gun out of a dozen brought from the district warehouses DA and KAS-32. To fight on unarmed training aircraft would be pure suicide. That's why, literally while avoiding all sorts of agreements with the higher aviation authorities, all the more so since the squadron was never listed in any mob planes, having been born as a result of a strong-willed decision of the senior major of the NKVD Godunov. Therefore, based on bureaucratic logic, it should have been under the jurisdiction of the Chekists. However, given the characteristics of the frontline aircraft of the Luftwaffe, in this respect, Marinka was firmly savvy during her military commissariat ordeals. There was a great chance that after installing rifle-caliber machine guns on Korn and Ducks, the said suicide would simply drag on a little. While avoiding all sorts of agreements with the higher aviation authorities, all the more so since the squadron was never listed in any mob planes, having been born as a result of a strong-willed decision of the senior major of the NKVD Godunov. Therefore, based on bureaucratic logic, it should have been under the jurisdiction of the Chekists. However, given the characteristics of the frontline aircraft of the Luftwaffe, in this respect, Marinka was firmly savvy during her military commissariat ordeals. There was a great chance that after installing rifle-caliber machine guns on Korn and Ducks, the said suicide would simply drag on a little. Based on bureaucratic logic, and it was supposed to be under the jurisdiction of the Chekists. However, given the characteristics of the frontline aircraft of the Luftwaffe, in this respect, Marinka was firmly savvy during her military commissariat ordeals. There was a great chance that after installing rifle-caliber machine guns on Korn and Ducks, the said suicide would simply drag on a little. Based on bureaucratic logic, and it was supposed to be under the jurisdiction of the Chekists. However, given the characteristics of the frontline aircraft of the Luftwaffe, in this respect, Marinka was firmly savvy during her military commissariat ordeals. There was a great chance that after installing rifle-caliber machine guns on Korn and Ducks, the said suicide would simply drag on a little. But Marinka, oddly enough, slipped past all these considerations in passing. There was much more excitement and anxiety. Will she be able to justify the trust of the motherland? And also, I'm ashamed to admit, I really wanted to chat with the girls. I hadn't seen them for almost 2 months. They, the Red Army soldier Polinina told herself, not without pride, turned out to be not as stubborn as she was. They surrendered on the 10th day. Karchushka, she was going to evacuate at all. And Klavochka immediately honestly admitted that she was afraid to go to the front. And what was Marinka's surprise when she saw both of them at the airfield? I was glad to say what? With their own, and on the ground, and in the sky more comfortable. The girls laugh. The planes at Ducks, the most experienced pilot is Drake. Not a squadron, but a flock of ducks. But everything that the Red Military Let says is listened to. After all, a real pilot and in general, they are suitable for their fathers. It took almost a day to form a shrinkage Truska, in the words of Drake, material and personnel. And the very next evening, without waiting until it began to get dark, for U-2s recognized as fit for flight, one after another, rose behind the captain's duck, with an effort dragging a 100-kilogram cigar stub under its belly. Having made a circle over the airfield, 8 girls, pilots and navigators, in plywood airplanes headed southwest, towards the approaching front. Chapter 14. September 30, 1941, Dmitrovskolovsky. Back in the times claiming the honorary title of immemorial, well, if only because, belonging to the personal past, now they objectively were the future, Godunov made a rule for himself, making a plan on the go, you risk failing the work. But the result must be looked after. In the truest sense of the word. Legs. Adjusted for the current moment, to leave. So his Emka dangled the rest of the day and the whole evening around the city and its environs, laying sightseeing and tourist routes for sophisticated Europeans. Looked around the city. Then, picking up Nefedov along the way, he went to the place of the future solemn meeting, in the interfluve of the Nessa and Narussa. He admired the still peaceful landscapes, wondering how to better adapt them for the war, and moved into the forest, with a feigned look of a great connoisseur, listening to the dialogue between the Stale and the party secretary, discussing with boyish excitement, and that, in terms of age, both are much closer to boys than to grandfathers, how to organize an ambush more cleverly. And again, to the city, with a stop at the station, is everything ready to send the evacuees and to receive the train from Morel? Fellow travelers changed, but more often than others, Fedosyotkin and Martinov turned out to be next to the commander. At the same time, an extra minute appeared to discuss particulars, without interrupting the hectic activity. Particulars are not necessarily trifles. Say, 45 tons of fuel and lubricants is impressive. And if you take into account that they are only half an hour away, it's a gift of fate. And not having time to really use it is idiocy, if not a crime. So it is simply necessary to send a couple more cars to the village with the beautiful Russian name Lubyanka. Godunov had no idea how right he was, mentally naming the contents of the Lubyanka warehouses as a gift. Even more so, I could not imagine that by his mere order to accumulate fuel in Dmitrovsk, he made additional adjustments to history. No tricky relationships, no epic, high butterfly effect, everything is simple, mundane, the effect of a caterpillar, which instead of a branch with succulent leaves was slipped a dry one. For in former history the fast-moving Heinz was so impetuous and yet fearlessly insolent that he left the rear far behind and entered the city with almost empty tanks. An hour or two is like a trifle, but not when the bill goes to these very hours. And here, the Lubyanka fuel, a gift, if not royal, then certainly princely, for sure. On that donated fuel they moved to Orel. History has not yet deviated from the route known to Godunov, but has already slowed down. Alexander Vasilievich did not suspect this, even a vague feeling, and that was not. After all, before his eyes, in a hurry, in a roar and abuse, in tears, an eternal tragedy called Exodus unfolded. Strings of people are moving towards the railway station. Militia patrols go from house to house, the uncles are the same age as Godunov and the boys are hardly much older than his youth members. On the faces, anxiety and concentration, except that it can be seen, the boys still continue to play war a little bit and the assignment for them is equal to an adventure. And a young lady in a fitted jacket, a beret on one side and with a brown plywood suitcase hurries to meet them, a granny wrapped in a painted, probably festive, short-haired granny with 2 canvas bags tied and thrown over her shoulder, pushes a wheelbarrow loaded to the top with belongings, a fair-haired girl, and behind her mother is dragging a smaller, stubborn girl, with her other hand clutching a baby in a blanket to her chest. The cart rattles, the girl screams, the baby cries, but in the general noise these sounds do not seem too loud. A deft splash, this is the handle of the young lady's suitcase came off, the locks opened from the impact on the ground, releasing, surprisingly, but not outfits, but a dozen or 2 books and many photographs. The grey-yellow cards were immediately picked up by the wind and carried along with withered foliage. Exodus. The girl deftly rolled the card under a tree and rushed to help. The smaller one, rubbing tears down her face with one hand, began to collect books with the other. A woman in an old but neat coat diligently closes the shutters, as if she is doing something very significant, and on a bench in front of the house, 4 children are sitting somehow too decorously, even in size. A woman, most likely, understands that her work does not make sense. But all of them are so calm. A girl and a boy, in a monastic guise, bring an old woman under the arms from a high porch, followed by an aunt in a scarf that has strayed to the back of her head, almost dragging a huge bundle and crying. Seems like it's just effort. A stern-looking grandfather, impatiently shouting at a teenager with 2 wicker baskets who hesitated at the gate, puts a galvanized trough with some food on the ground and whistles like a boy. After a couple of minutes at the trough, a dozen mongrels of all sizes and colors. Grandfather looks at them as if he has nowhere to hurry. An elderly woman, in a down scarf and a summer dress, runs towards the patrol, shouting from afar. Misha! Misha, have you seen my Vanyatka? Were you in the district committee of the Komsomol? Well, go take a look. Fedosyotkin listens, grins joylessly. Volunteers under the age of 17 were ordered to be persecuted in 3 necks, but it is understandable, the party secretary is worried that someone will think of getting lost on the way from the district committee of the Komsomol to the house. Listen, Andrei Dmitrievich, isn't it time to lock the doors in the district committees? Has the mobilization along the party and Komsomol lines been completed? Completed. Godunov broke off. The secretary looked with such wary surprise, as if he suspected that he was simply being tested. So people go. Who needs what kind of help? Here are those on. He asked a completely innocent question, but in fact. Well, Sturlitz had never been so close to failure. Vaughn and Martinov gradually squint over his shoulder, or is he just listening to the conversation? I wonder how you, Matvey Matveik, liked party officials and Komsomol leaders in the 80s, who wanted to be not the salt of the earth, but a white bone. Aftercare costs. And the symbols of today, here they are, you, Alexander Vasilich, in plain sight, the doors of the church, which were again opened by the downright icon-painting old man, Father John, to give shelter over the head of the victims of the fire, and the doors of the district committee, which this simple guy stubbornly does not want to close species, and well done, which ones to look for. We convinced you, Godunov smiled. Drop you to the district committee? And mechanically looked at the watch pulling his wrist. Time. It would be time to brainstorm, for sure. He would have affirmed the idea that this device, presented to him by the current reality, coupled with the clothes in which he found himself here, is somehow connected with movement, and maybe even capable of such fantastic processes. Influence. Chronometer, what could be more trivial and symbolic? Only a chronometer that constantly reminds, precious time is running out and wasting it on empty thoughts, the luxury of peaceful days and stupidity. So the thought flashed, and got stuck on the periphery of consciousness, muffledly disturbing. The watch, so solid and significant, was similar to the one that the grandfather had given Sanka the lad as a keepsake. For many years they served as a talisman both in exams and on campaigns, except that they didn't save them from the routine, and they got lost during one of the crossings, in a completely strange way, as if they were bored with accompanying the gouging, who until more than 40 years did not comprehend the true value of time. And now the spear-shaped hands of the older brother of that chronometer trampled the snake-like number 6. It's time to return to the station, to meet people and cargo from Oral. And immediately determined the place for both those and these. At the station, there was a quite predictable Babylonian pandemonium, at first still retaining some semblance of orderliness and purposefulness, but now it has pretty much squandered them. With the dispatch of the next, second train, we had to wait a bit to let the oncoming one pass. Wrapped up, angry aunts and 12.5 militias drove small fry from a piece of iron. Godunov worked long enough at school to understand that an attempt to accumulate so many children in one place and for a long time, even for a couple of hours, to find something for everyone and everyone that prevents active, and far from always safe, exploration of the world is fantastic. So it was to be hoped that there would be no incidents. The old men sat on trunks, on bundles, and a low voice was woven into the general hubbub. On the lawn behind the plank station house, a scrawny grandmother was milking a goat, and a flock of kids, armed with mugs ahead of time, waited at a distance. The girls, seated in a row on a bench, harmoniously deduced, the order was given, he, to the west, she, to the other side, and for some reason they came out joyfully and provocatively. A nail-sized man was busily dragging a bucket of water from the pump. On the other side of the tracks, on the trampled area with the skeletons of football goals, fires had already been lit, something was being fried, and they were getting ready to blow up the samovar. Godunov felt both bitterness and pride at the same time. He screwed up with the evacuation and still does not know what could have been done differently in order to prevent such anarchy and, moreover, not to deliver military cargo in full view of the world. But these are the people, right? Golden people. Adapt to everything. There was just enough time before the arrival of the train to smoke a cigarette and look into the station building, where the tragicomic Mikhail Sergeyevich, for some reason settled in the closet of the ticket office, with the doomed window, gave sausage to the chuckling aunts. Godunov also smiled involuntarily, and caught himself thinking that, despite the stalemate, which had never been more difficult in his life, he smiled much more often than usual. Fate, in response, either grins with gloomy irony, the meat-packing van now has to carry explosives, then smiles, so openly and sincerely, albeit through tears, that Godunov does not even have the strength to be angry with himself for not thought through and unfinished. There, in a hurry to help the frail boy militia, who takes a long time to adapt, as if to grab a box from the ground, a short, thick woman. By determination. Still, it was necessary to attract the civilian population for unloading and loading, Godunov thinks. Well, his own stereotypes do not allow him to act according to the moment. No, it would be naive to dream of observing the regime of secrecy, but besides that, heavy boxes with explosives and these aunts, as if on command, rushed to the train, to sons, to brothers, to the fathers. And pulling so that they themselves have tears in their eyes, but damn, you will drive them away now, you should have thought before. The fateful importance of the future is not connected with the heroic anarchy that is happening at the station. But there's nothing you can do about it. The militias are not regular fighters. For them, these women are not civilian population, but mothers, neighbors, colleagues, acquaintances. Some of them just today had breakfast at the same table, and now, literally in half an hour, they will part for an indefinite period. To think that for someone the term will be indefinite, not now. And the security officers, it seems, decided that everything was predetermined by the command. However, aunts try not to load. They didn't think of it at the district committee meeting. Oh, they didn't think of it. And who is to blame for this? After all, even those who have buttonholes on their collars still do not think in terms of a big war, one in which the boundaries between fighters and civilians, between front and rear, are erased. A lot of things you thought over and calculated, Alexander Vassilievich, sitting over books and reflecting on the cards. But there are things that can only be learned through experience. God forbid, not bitter. Godunov's Amka left the station at the same time as the last truck. Already, fussing and calling their own, those who were to go to the evacuation were loaded into the just empty cars. The second squad was supposed to leave after the first. To Ali Ayek. The same woman who so categorically intervened in unloading ran behind the cars. That Oleg. How can I find you? I don't know, Ma. The guy in the back of the truck looked down in embarrassment. Let's find some way. Comrade Red Commander. The woman screamed even louder. Where are we, huh? Godunov made a sign to Demon to stop, turned to the woman. While an Oriole, and then it will be determined. Coughed. It seemed that these words scratched the larynx. Ignatov promised to come to an agreement with the Tula people, so that they would be puzzled about the accommodation of people, and even better, they would help with transport. However, there is no solid answer yet, but to share assumptions. History does not tolerate the subjunctive mood. How weighty and assertive the inimitable and unforgettable head teacher Larissa Mikhailovna pronounced this phrase. So let's not reckon. And we will lay. Take responsibility and make history to the best of your ability. And here it is, how to do it. Don't worry, you will be taken care of. And thanks for the help. The woman threw up her hands. Am I for myself? I am for my son, for Tolik. Help, she shrugged. How not to help your own? And again I remembered an associated, the neighbor Tamara Vadamovna, a man of the same resilient, stubborn breed, nurtured by the garrisons and brought up by the absence of a solid male shoulder within the limits of personal square meters, hysterically repeats into the mobile phone. Kostya, I said to be at home at 10. My nerves are not state-owned. Kostya turned 30 last year, he has a third marriage and 4 children. And here, it may turn out, there will be nowhere to write a letter. And what should she say? Asked to believe in the best? He didn't say anything, nodded to Demon, go, they say. Turned away. And he fixed his eyes on 2 crying women, a large one and a small one. Well, is it possible? Well, is it possible? Mother said. I didn't even know where to look for you. Well, is it possible? Ma, I'm already the smallest. The younger one continued to say something, penitently and stubbornly. Godunov no longer heard the words, but he could guess. The girl assured that she would not have been lost for anything and would have made it on time. From behind the bosom of a child's checkered coat protruded the sleepy muzzle of a red puppy. Still, people do not lie when they endow human consciousness with all sorts of amazing possibilities. Godunov lay down to take a nap on the sofa in Fedosyatkin's office, so short and hard that Prokrusts himself would envy him, and instantly fell asleep, as if he had dropped headfirst into a well. And Godunov saw Comrade Gorokov pacing the room from corner to corner, as if a billiard ball was rolling on the table by itself. The head with the haircut, under Kotovsky, sways to the beat of the steps, and the words, also to the beat, such an assertive recitative. And the agitator brigade is indignant at the fact that with ambushes, they say, they were too clever, swung wide, and instead of a full-fledged splash, a go-ahead will come out. Someone agreed with him, whom Godunov at first mistook for the owner of the office, and only then realized that this was none other than Odintsov. Then Gorokov disappeared somewhere. Save yourselves, comrade captain of the 3rd rank. He woke up in a cold sweat and with one thought, the authors of alhistorical books are bastards. Well, what would it cost them, so smart, shoveling tons and gigabytes of material, to write, in between, a manual for a hitman in a period so beloved by them all? Consider a set of typical situations, work out the best course of action, taking into account, so to speak, a complex afterknowledge. Here, for example, the evacuation of the civilian population from the front line. Did Odintsov arrive? A hoarse waking voice. No, Comrade Commander. Fedosyatkin looked up from his papers. Moreover, he did not read or write, but crouched right at the table, placing several cardboard folders instead of a pillow. Godunov glanced at his wristwatch. 18:15. It would be possible not to wake the person yet. So yes or no? He asked sharply, drowning out the intelligentsia's reflections. Hasn't arrived yet. Don't worry, at the Nefedov station, he immediately. Fedosyatkin hesitated a little. Comrade Commander, we have found a better place for an ambush here. Well, we are with Nefedov. Of course, it would be necessary immediately, but... One hunter advised, Grandfather Pasha. Excuse me for asking him, but Palignatic is a reliable man, albeit a non-partisan one. Godunov frowned and mentally waved his hand. They asked, what now, under the tribunal, or what? Not a day had passed since he was in Dmitrovsk, and he had already begun to get used to the fact that the war here had a taste of partisanism. Should I show you on the map or shall we go? The restless secretary of the district committee continued to bend his line. Show. And then we'll go. And here's another thing you and I, Andrei Dmitrievich, missed. You find a responsible little man, it's better, I think, a woman, she'll find a common language with mothers faster. In a word, it is necessary that tags be sewn on children's clothes right at the station and at least write a name and surname with an indelible pencil. God protects the one who is safe, and, remembering Ignatov, he added reluctantly. As our grandmothers used to say. Fedosyatkin thought for a moment. Let's do it, Comrade Commander. Well, let's hope that in this reality there will be fewer children lost on the roads of war. At least for a few people. At 6:30 in the afternoon, Boris Fedorovich Churov died, an eccentric old gardener, like many truly enthusiastic people. He went out to say goodbye to the fading asters, sat down on a bench, and died. The daughter and granddaughter, already ready to leave, rushed to the neighbors, someone ran to the district committee. Time did not wait, and Grandfather Boria was buried here, in the garden, under his favorite apple tree. The first loss during the defense of Dmitrovsk. Chapter 15. October 1, 1941, Dmitrovskolovsky. Once in a past life, the military leader Godunov AVE with the Youth Army of the Guard of Honor had a chance to survive a friendly raid by a commission from the Ministry of Defense, which came in some unknown way to measure the level of military patriotic work in the region. Friendly, because the UNAMIA movement passed through the Department of Education. The raid is because it is almost unexpected. Almost. For the day before the chief of the post? One called from the regional military commissariat and notified, in an hour the chief will come. A quite predictable rush began. The chief did not come, he arrived. On a black Volga and with accompanying persons. He was greeted in full dress, except perhaps with bread and salt and no fanfare. An inadequate replacement for the latter was the green parrot Palechka, who yelled something inarticulate and not so solemn, and, as a result, sharpened in the pantry until the end of the entire series of visits. The military commissar said, "The auditor is going to visit us, but we, in our boundless generosity, will share it with you, it won't seem like a little to anyone." Further, according to tradition, they began to judge and decide how exactly to strike the imagination of Moscow guests. In conclusion, the chief once again surveyed the guardhouse, a combination of dark shades of blue and brown, known among professionals as what the city sent, gave rise to an expression of restrained sadness on his face, and condescendingly, with a precisely adjusted degree of doubt in his voice, blessed the guys for the deed, who, no doubt, was to go down in the history of Lent? 1. How exactly to strike the imagination of Moscow guests? In conclusion, the chief once again surveyed the guardhouse, a combination of dark shades of blue and brown, known among professionals as what the city sent, gave rise to an expression of restrained sadness on his face, and condescendingly, with a precisely adjusted degree of doubt in his voice, blessed the guys for the deed, who, no doubt, was to go down in the history of Lent? 1. How exactly to strike the imagination of Moscow guests? In conclusion, the chief once again surveyed the guardhouse, a combination of dark shades of blue and brown, known among professionals as what the city sent, gave rise to an expression of restrained sadness on his face, and condescendingly, with a precisely adjusted degree of doubt in his voice, blessed the guys for the deed, who, no doubt, was to go down in the history of Lent? 1. Was to enter the history of Lent? 1. Was to enter the history of Lent? 1. The regional military commissar Odintsov arrived alone at 7:55 in Moscow. On a personally piloted aircraft. He was greeted by more than officials, the commander of the Oriel Defensive Region, the first secretary of the district committee of the CPSU-B, and the future documentary writer, but without any solemnity. It was clear to everyone without long words, if Guderian's imagination could not be fully captured, then for sure it would not seem enough to anyone. Yes, and the spectacle itself turned out to be everyday, devoid of any kind of impressiveness. In the muddy pre-dawn twilight, a toy silhouette of an airplane appeared, a few moments behind its own sound, a low zh clearly audible in the damp air, like a big beetle, planted in a box, buzzes. Godunov immediately remembered the monument in the square near the Oriel Machine Building College. The designer was holding a model aircraft in his hand. The barrel-shaped, streamlined A-16, of course, does not at all look like an angular whatnot, but there is only one parent, a native of the Oriel province, a native of Nikolai Nikolaevich Polikarpov. The duck glided across the sky, as if on purpose, along the very border of the rising sun, and for some reason it even more resembled a child's toy. And then, just as smoothly, she went down, and ran towards the landing lights of the fires, slightly jumping and listing on bumps. The motor changed its buzzing to a measured tapping and then completely fell silent. The plane stopped about 30 paces from Godunov. Effectively, do not say anything. Comrade Military Commissar is not deprived of flight force. Even though the face is strict, very strict, at least sculpt a statue in the spirit of antiquity, established on the ground. Briefly reported to Godunov about what was happening in Oriel. Befitting the occasion of the conviction that he did everything in his power and even a little more, he did not demonstrate despondency, which should be expected from a person who perfectly understands that no matter what he does, it is unlikely to be enough to solve all the primary tasks. He did not show. Yes, and it's clearer to everyone, it hurts to hell with them, these paramount ones, you'll break your back, maneuvering between them. Odintsov walked around the airfield. Loudly, of course, it is said, on the airfield. The landing site, prepared as well as the forces and deadlines allowed. But airfield, of course, sounds much shorter and more optimistic. However, only a person gifted with considerable imagination could notice even a shadow of optimism on the face of the military commissar. Odintsov intercepted the questioning glance of the commander. He seemed to shrug his shoulders now, but no, he bowed his head, sort of approvingly. Just call, you need to hurry them up so that they have time before dark. Godunov did not ask again or clarify, for as long as he could remember, he could not stand nearby curious profane people. He himself did not have enough in his old age and in another life to join them. Well, my heart still felt a little heavy, with the weight that lies on it, imperceptibly. Almost. Considering how much you have to dangle today in order to be in time everywhere and have time for everything, it will settle down, this heaviness. Shaken down. Compressed. Buried deep. And then she fell out of the dark corner of consciousness and put it on the brain. When Godunov saw them, they still managed to get there before dark. Sat safely. Everybody. Already the sixth part of the squadron. Strength. It is unlikely that Godunov heard or imagined. The military commissar breathed a sigh of relief. And the report of the commander, a pale, lean captain of indeterminate age, listened frankly approvingly. However, he avoided looking in the direction of the flyer recruits. Why is clear as God's day. Skinny, disheveled Valkyries in somehow sewn-in overalls parachutes are trying to take a stand at attention, and their knees are still shaking, and their eyes are looking to the side, others to the ground. And you know for sure that such girls will soon earn from their enemies, as they deserve a reward from their own, the nicknamed night witches. But somehow I can't believe that right now, they will survive, they won't let me down. Girls, they must be 20 years old. Not so little in modern times. Godunov, using the example of his own father, knows that they grow up quickly in war. And yet, in comparison with the high school students of the youth army, indeed girls, femininity in all six of them combined, like one Genya Selivanova. That one over there, big-eyed, even looks a little like Genya, or not, a boyish figure. Her hair is cut ugly, as if along a ruler, her nose is snub-nosed, her mouth is too big. No, it doesn't. And the feeling that he sees her not for the first time. And at once, something else, but good. After all, these girls have faces. Your own relatives. We wouldn't let you down, he said aloud, in an undertone. But no one looked back. Either they didn't hear, or he simply voiced a general idea. The crews have a rest, the commander is with me. Oh girls. And the airplanes are a match for you, light boats. What will it be like for you in the fifth ocean in the middle of a storm? From the book of Vladimir Ovsyannikov, So the Victory Was Born, Oriel, Orel's Dat, 2002. The role of the individual in history. No matter how much this is said, no matter how many documented books are published, no matter how respected the veterans of the Great Patriotic War are, and no matter how carefully the memory of the fallen is preserved in society, it is difficult, almost impossible for our contemporary to comprehend the measure of responsibility which the historical situation placed on man. When objective circumstances burst into your life in the guise of armored killing machines, you need to be firmly aware of honor and duty in order to stand in their way. And you need to be truly a hero to survive and win. Cadres decide everything. This aphoristically accurate thought of IV Stalin, which does not lose its relevance to this day, is perceived by frontline soldiers in a special way. As you know, the first months of the war were characterized by situations of acute shortage of reserves and resources. Conditions were changing so rapidly and threateningly that attempts to change them were tantamount to an intention to hold back an avalanche with one's hand. But people, ordinary people who only yesterday grew bread, stood at the machines, sat at their desks, turned out to be capable of truly superhuman deeds. Legends about these people arose much earlier than memoirs and scientific monographs appeared. A well-known fact, on October 1 to 2, 1941, the troops of the Bryansk front for 40 hours heroically held back the fierce onslaught of a significantly superior enemy in the Oriel direction. Skillfully delivered flank attacks led to heavy losses in the 10th Motorized Infantry Division, and the Wehrmacht's 3rd Panzer Division actually ceased to exist. 40 hours. Just 40 hours. Less than 2 days. But you feel the steel weight of every second of these 40 hours. You barely opened the books of the participants in these grandiose events, be it the memoirs of Marshal A.I. Eremenko or documentary novels by local historian and writer M.M. Martinov. Matvey Matveyevich knew firsthand that it was these 40 hours that made it possible to create a new frontier on the path of mechanized hordes of intruders. They became the city of Dmitrovsk-Olovsky, then, the regional center of the Kursk region. Dmitrovsk has a special place in the history of the Great Patriotic War. The small town became, in the figurative expression of the Oriel writer A. Yonovsky, the first circle of hell for the Nazis, the first line of defense in the legendary Battle of Oriel. The heart and brain of the city's defense is Senior Major of State Security Alexander Vasilyevich Godunov. He was appointed commander of the Orlovsky defensive region the day before, and arrived in Dmitrovsk around noon on September 30th. Here, in Dmitrovsk, his outstanding organizational skills and ability to make quick non-standard decisions were fully revealed. The most important area of work, the evacuation of the civilian population, was entrusted to them by A.D. Fedosyotkin, now an order-bearer, an honorary citizen of the cities of Orel and Kursk. By the age of 28, Andrei Fedosyotkin had come a long way. He was a foreman, forest ranger, director of a timber industry enterprise, and everywhere he showed himself as a skillful and proactive leader, caring not only about the business entrusted to him, but also about people. Just before the war, he was appointed to the post of first secretary of the district committee of the party and honorably fulfilled his party duty in the most difficult conditions of the first months of the war. On his shoulders lay the mobilization into the ranks of the Red Army, and the evacuation of part of the population to the rear, and the export of material resources. At the same time, he accepted, resettled, employed refugees arriving in the region from the temporarily occupied territories. People left their native city in an organized manner, with restrained grief, but without losing their presence of mind. They were leaving, saying goodbye to their relatives, who in a matter of hours had to adequately repel the first blow of the enemy inexorably rushing towards Moscow. On this day, the formation of the militia was completed. It was replenished with young men born in 1923 to 1924, among them there were more than 20 people who passed the TRP standards, and men under 60, many of whom fought on the fronts of the First World War and defended the young Soviet Republic during the civil years. militias and Chekists who arrived from Ural under the command of senior lieutenant of the NKVD border troops Nefedov patrolled the city and prepared defensive lines on the near approaches. A significant role in the organization of mine and infantry ambushes belongs to Martinov, then a junior lieutenant of the NKVD, director of the timber industry SG, Jarikov, and Dmitrovsky Hunter, invalid of the Civil War P.I. Shevlyakov, who died in the defense of his native city. As soon as the city was empty, the preparation of the second frontier began. The peaceful city, which only recently delighted the inhabitants with its silence and spaciousness, has turned into a cramped trap for armored fascist beasts and people who have lost their humanity. And by the time Guderian's second tank group, using superiority in tanks, aviation and manpower, broke into the operational space, the Russian, Dmitrov answer to the presumptuous conquerors of Europe was already ready. From the book of Matvey Martinov, With a Dream of the Future, Tula, Priaksko Book Publishing House, 1965. On the central square of the revived Dmitrovskolovsky, on the eve of the 20th anniversary of the Great Victory, a monument was erected by the sculptor A.N. Berganov and architect R.K. Topurides. On a low pedestal of pink granite there is a bronze sculptural group, a young Chekist fighter armed with the famous three-ruler, an elderly militiaman, squeezing his faithful Tulka with large, strong peasants, and a woman, intensely, with anxious expectation, peering into the distance and clutching it to her chest, amazing, poignant symbol. A pile of autumn leaves. Old-timers say, the woman is strikingly similar to the teacher Efrosinia Stepanovna Agakova, one of the heroines of these memorable days. And in a small square on the western outskirts, a monument created by the Dmitrovites, the Rodionov brothers, appeared several years earlier. In the guide you can read, Monument to the Female Pilots, Defenders of Dmitrovskolovsky. But the monument immediately received an unofficial name that invariably surprises visitors, Valkyrie. A girl in a flight helmet holds a dove of peace on a high open palm. In this case, there is no room for guesswork. While working on the sculpture, muralists used a frontline photograph of Marina Orlova, née Polinina, who now lives in the hero city of Murmansk. Marina Alexeyevna was unable to arrive at the opening of the monument, but at the rally her letter was read with gratitude to the creators of the monument and with these words addressed to the new generation of Dmitrovites. On holidays, it is customary to wish each other a peaceful sky overhead. A peaceful blue sky with a bright sun and calm clouds, with swift birds and planes slowly floating in the distant heights. Planes that carry only good people and payloads on their sides. Even if the sky flashes with lightning or blazes with lightning, it remains peaceful. And after the rain, the sun rises again. I wish you never know another sky. Chapter 16. October 2, 1941, near Dmitrovsk. In January 33, Klaus Wessel turned 14. His father gave him a set of tools, and his older brother Helmut gave him a leather-bound notebook. One dreamed of seeing Klaus as a good auto mechanic, just like Uncle Willie. He never sat without a piece of bread, let alone a simple hard worker. For some reason, another saw in the clumsy, red-haired teenager who still wore out his clothes for him, and at the table strove to snatch a tastier piece, no less than the new Schiller. In the future, of course. And in the present, Klaus had to study a lot and diligently, so much so as not to disappoint either his father or his brother. Uncle Willie was pleased with his nephew, set an example for his son, Fat Gottfried, and did not even scold when Klaus was distracted from work to scribble a line or two in a notebook. The one in brown leather binding, he always carried it with him. On the first page, having spent 2 whole evenings, he drew out in black ink the words, Sturm und Drang, and below, a poetic dedication to the great Sturmer. At this time, the guys from the Sturmabteilung were marching through the streets and sounded Die Fahren hoch, written by a legendary person who bore the same surname as Klaus. Fat Gottfried put on a brown uniform, and Klaus suddenly realized that he was not fat at all, but simply athletic. And he began to secretly, but desperately envy. And work in a car repair shop for 2. Under the onslaught of new impressions, the unfamous and so far not involved in anything great, Wessel, as best he could, drew with a pencil on the flyleaf of his notebook war in the form of a beautiful young woman. According to the plan, with a raised sword, she was supposed to show the nation the way up, to freedom and prosperity. But the draftsman Klaus was far from Klaus the poet, and the war turned out to be similar not so much to the true Aryan Lot Chen, the daughter of a dentist, but to the crooked Louise from the grocery store. Yes, and the sword, ashamed to admit, was more like a chisel, and the nation, half a dozen humanoid logs. They pulled up gnarled branches, as if trying to catch on the edge of the maiden's mantle. The mantle came out, perhaps, best of all, with neat folds. Only fools and cowards see chaos in war, but in reality it is order. Klaus wrote a whole cycle of 5 poems about this, just in time for the next meeting with fellow writers. They casually called themselves Bohemians, gathered in one wonderful cellar, and Wessel immediately became in this circle something like a leader. Oh, this solemn and majestic word, Führer. But this time only the faithful little Klein listened enthusiastically to Klaus, the others thoughtfully sipped beer, and the mocker Krause, quite possibly half-Jewish, scrawled a very offensive epigram on a piece of paper. Such a serious topic must have called for schnapps, but Uncle Willie did not drink hard liquor himself and did not allow his employees. I wouldn't have looked that my nephew instantly put him out of the gate. It was a pity to lose the place. And Bohemia, that's why she is Bohemia. It seems that the French have this word somehow connected with the gypsies, brr. Klaus was still shrugging his shoulders shiveringly, imagining where this path might lead him. And he even wrote the poem Repentance, in which he symbolically spoke about how wise fate in the person of the Führer prevented him from falling into the abyss from the treacherously crumbling mountain path and indicated a reliable, solid road. The road that led not just anywhere, but to that same Bohemian France. And the beginning of summer near Bordeaux, as it suddenly turned out, was no worse than near Weihingen. And the war turned out to be similar, if not to the beautiful Lottchen, but not to the anarchic old woman from terrible fairy tales, who laughs terribly and waves her scythe without looking. No, she was like the grocer Louise, who had everything counted and entered into the ledger with a firm hand, otherwise what was about to happen, carefully planned and aimed at a strictly defined result. Unpoetic, but the movement of a nation to greatness and prosperity cannot be subject to romantic impulses. Everything went as it should. The booming clicks of bullets on armor were like raindrops hitting an overturned bucket. Explosions, something remotely similar to Klaus experienced in childhood, when a big fellow neighbor, sneaking up from behind, hit him on the ears with all his might. Yes, if only he beat him. He also lifted it into the air, and shook it. It gets dark in the eyes, the world is shaking, it hurts and is disgusting to the point of nausea. But all this cannot last forever. It ended then, and it will end now. Previously, young Wessel had only his own patience, now he also has the armor of a faithful panzer. Klaus knew he wasn't a coward. A real Aryan always overcomes fear. The French, well, the French resisted just long enough to earn respect and not devalue the victory of the German arms. At least that's how Klaus saw it from his driver's seat. And who dares to say what was seen wrong? After all, he was able to discern and smell that France is beautiful and fragrant, like a festive cake, and French women are like goddess dolls sitting on clouds of cream. Here is wonderfully soft, warm, like a freshly baked biscuit, earth. And hearts softened by Bohemian life. Softness is not a vice. For the vanquished. And the winner has the right to be merciful. It is strange that Helmut still does not understand this, which is why for the first time he did not approve of Klaus's poems. The elder brother must have imagined a swarthy, gypsy girl with vulgar manners. In fact, Josephine is Aryan blonde and bright-eyed. And she looks like a cautious, delicate fox, both in life and in the verses of her German Cher Amy. And Helmut, he is a maximalist. And, as it turned out, much more romantic than Klaus. Health did not allow him to go to the Luftwaffe, he went into aircraft mechanics. And he will marry exactly a true Aryan. You don't have to worry about your cousin at all. Uncle Willie proudly wrote that Gottfried was serving in the Totenkopf division and had even received his first officer rank. The first officer sounds bewitching. Fortunately, Klaus is not envious. He hopes that after the victory of Great Germany, everyone will get what they want, in accordance with the contribution to the cause of the nation, of course. And Helmut will be able to invent without being distracted by all sorts of trifles. And Gottfried and Uncle Willie will move to their own estate, somewhere closer to the south. Uncle's rheumatism requires a different climate. So it was thought and dreamed quite recently. And in the last letter, dated August 13th, but received only the day before yesterday, my uncle lamented, my cousin's division was transferred to the north of Russia, who knows how this will affect the subsequent well-being of the family. Those civilians. Even a hint of minor losses plunges them into despondency. He, Klaus, has long forgotten what a soft bed and peace are. And summer France here, in this evil country, shrouded like a shroud in cold autumn fogs, is remembered as a marvelous fairy tale. But he does not lose his presence of mind. After the war, he would certainly have enough stamps to, if not buy out his uncle's workshop, then open his own. And bring Josephine to Weihingen, and poems and observations are for the soul and for the memory of posterity. Let them know that their ancestor was not the last of the soldiers of the Reich. He saw a lot, experienced hardships, endured dangers. By the way, a dedication can come out wonderful, something like a letter to the future. Why exactly today? Truly significant days are approaching. Christmas will surely be allowed to be celebrated in Moscow. There will be time to reflect and write thoughts on the title page of the notebook. Black ink can be obtained from the clerk. And today, in front of them is the most ordinary river, the name of which Klaus does not know. Further, as they said, there will be a small town. He did not remember the name. They do not turn off their engines, do not move away from their tanks. Intelligence is about to return, and forward. No, they are unlikely to face Russian resistance. I talked with the experienced. Everyone as one believes that the Russians threw their last reserves against the 3rd Division in this direction, and so far there is no need to wait for sensible defense from these stubborn fanatics. Klaus remembered the burnt tanks seen near. He glanced at his notebook, near Sevsk. Unlucky comrades from the 3rd. And shivered, of course, just from a gust of wind. And the expectation is somehow always disturbing. And intelligence, hopefully, it will confirm that the crossing is reliable. Otherwise, Klaus's temples ached from a bad premonition. Strange, even unnatural, the word that here denotes a shallow place in the river sounds very. I almost thought, in Aryan, quickly corrected myself, in European, and so similar to the native, kind, bred. A good, domestic, reliable word, and a shaky muddy bottom, covered with muddy cold water. Wessel looked at the river as at an enemy pretending to be a submissive civilian. I thought, not to fix the image? No. Still, what good? You will bring trouble. He shrugged his shoulders coldly. This time, not from the wind, from the memories of one such river, the bridge over which was blown up and had to wade. Stonekurt slipped through with apparent ease. Klaus boldly poked his way in after him. Past something has passed, but enough to drink the engine with water and sand. And, what's worse, he was confused. Wouldn't have avoided penalties if it wasn't for Kurt. Uncle Willie himself would bow respectfully to such a mechanic. And friendship with him would be very useful in the future. Yes, that's an annoyance. Carmany does not want to get close to anyone, and even when he offers help, he looks gloomy. His face is like a plaster mask, only his lips move, his motionless gaze is directed somewhere into space. And yet, no, Wessel understands that the fear of violence is the lot of the weak, and the need for intimidation is already obvious. You can't cope with this country without it. But the extraordinary skill and precise calculation used to crush the cat, which decided to run across the road in front of the tank, or was it a dog? What is left of it is indistinguishable. If the dog is all the more incomprehensible, some senseless cruelty. But Kurt always helps comrades, without waiting for requests. And now, Wessel found Carmany with his eyes. He wanders between the tanks, like a priest of the ancient Germans, between the trees of the sacred grove, looks at them with reverence, stops, listens, as if they were telling him something creepy and mesmerizing. And in general, the spectacle is epic. An armored flock is ready to rush to prey, and people are no longer just people, but superhumans, to whom this aggressive power is submissive. The sun does not have enough strength to break through the dank fog, and the lights of cigarettes break through, add up to a new constellation. Klaus has no doubts, it predicts victory. Before the mind's eye of Gefreiter Wessel is something that has yet to happen, that great one, of which he was lucky to be a participant. Now predatory silhouettes will emerge from the haze, motorcycles of scouts. Brief commands will sound more significant than any parting words. And an irresistible stream, but bound by steel discipline, will break free. Motorcycles and humans are one entity, dogs of war that sniff out prey. Following, with the swiftness and pressure of the beaters, are the armored cars. And only then, a chivalrous type of panzer. Infantry on armored personnel carriers, artillery, anti-aircraft gunners. Knights are not supposed to do without servants. They say that the division commander himself often prefers a tank to a headquarters vehicle. It is unlikely that in a small town there will be work for the panzers. But such a rapid forward movement also takes away strength. The group commander justifies the nickname Heinz the Hurricane again and again. Oh, yes, this age requires just such a storm and onslaught. So while there is an opportunity, Wessel looks sideways at Stone Kurt again, this time disapprovingly. We need to rest. And Klaus lights up, covering the flame with his hand from the wind from the river. It immediately gets warmer. Power and comfort coexist. And Klaus thinks, not so much about the war, but about shades of grey. A whitish grey mist, like a beggar's worn cloak. The armor is painted in noble grey. Nature endowed the predator, taking care of its food, with a skin of a similar shade. A good image. And the day for writing a dedication to the Es today is not the worst. Thoughts are put into words without the slightest effort. True, you will have to be content with a stub of a chemical pencil. The more diligence the work requires. We have to sacrifice the last clean handkerchief, silk. Oh yes, Klaus has that non-frontline luxury. Laying it on the armor and only then opening the precious notebook. On this ordinary autumn day, on the way to the Russian capital, Gefreiter Klaus Wilhelm Wessel, it seems that he was in the tank before he could hear the command. It seems. I managed to put the notebook into the pocket of my overalls, clinging to the thought in the corner of my mind, the future family heirloom does not belong there at all. A handkerchief, well, not a big loss. The wooden bridge across the Russian River is surprisingly similar to another, memorable one over Enns. As a teenager, Klaus fished from it, but on it he first met the cold, like Lorelei, beauty Lot Chen. I found time for memories. A sentimental poet behind the levers of a formidable panzer, a more stupid sight is hard to imagine. And this damned bridge can't possibly be like that one. Keep it, okay. Klaus' palms got wet, how he hates water. And he loves hard ground, even if it is not so hard, it is wetly crushed under the tracks. But Klaus began to forget that she was an enemy. 2 villages passed by, quiet, as if extinct. No fortifications, no Russian fanatics with grenades and bottles. Oh, Wessel saw what trouble the devilish mixture that the Bolsheviks put into bottles can do. Klaus is not a coward. The hatch covers are raised, the commander surveys the surroundings from time to time, hardly with a specific goal, most likely so, for order. The shutter on the viewing slot is also open. Smell of gasoline. Familiar, but for some reason disturbing. Seems to smell stronger than ever. But it's not the first time that the sense of smell has been joking viciously with Wessel, so Uncle Willie, for the time being, until his nephew learned to hide, chuckled saying, "You are just like a Frau in an interesting position." With the beginning of the service, Klaus somehow suddenly got used to it, and now it has come on again, even his head is spinning and thrown into a fever. Everything seems to be the same, but it seems that at first the earth bounced hard, and only after that it boomed loudly. Or so it seemed, because the first explosion was followed by another one, and another, so much that the continuous rumble blocked the thunder. Dense hot air forced its way into the peephole, struck at the eyes, knocked out the tears, and immediately dried them up. Wessel thought in panic, he burned it. But no, the vision returned as suddenly as it had disappeared. Or did he see not what really happened, but just his own nightmare? The tank, lifted by the explosion, was writhing as if right in the air. For a brief moment it became quiet. How many shades of the word quiet? The conflagration was raging, people were screaming, howling like an animal, yes, probably people too, but nothing else exploded, and in this almost silence, Klaus became aware of himself again and understood. He was sitting pressed into the seat and covering his head with his hands. He thought it was all over. Next thought, well, if no one noticed. But Wessel did not have time to look around to make sure. Through the ringing in his ears he made out the low, stupefyingly measured rumble of a machine gun. And somehow I immediately realized, not German. And at that moment, the sky screeched predatory, and was attracted to the earth by fiery threads, and grew together, leaving no room for anything living. Wessel was brought back to life by pain and Herr Lieutenant. More precisely, at first he felt pain in his shoulder, and then he realized that he was being tormented. And very slowly, from the 10th, probably, attempt, he realized that the commander was trying to explain, the danger had passed. And did not believe. But the habit of obeying overpowered him, and he began to get out of the tank, slowly and uncertainly, feeling like a rag doll, whose head even hangs on a few thin threads. 24 steps is an exorbitant effort now. Some 10 meters is an insurmountable distance. And for death, just nothing. She was there. And she left a sign, a tank with its turret buried in the ground. Whose? Wessel did not make out, before his eyes swam again. But he surprisingly clearly saw Kurt at a distance, and did not doubt at all that it was Kurt. Stone lay in such a position, as if he was going to grab all the land that he could reach. Klaus laughed, well, who would have doubted? And realized that he was going crazy. It is unlikely that he will ever be able to calmly see the fire now, even how the tobacco smolders in Uncle Willie's pipe. Then, probably, there will be panic, but now, some kind of unnatural calm. And the maddening crackle of a big fire does not so much drown out voices as it devours the essence. If a person understands that he is losing his mind, it means that he has not completely lost it yet. And if the Herr Lieutenant is not slow to give the order, he, Klaus, has a chance to hold on. Gerfrieder Wessel is used to taking chances. Carefully and prudently. Not trying to break into the most knowledgeable and skillful, but not hiding their advantages. The lieutenant must have realized this long ago, and therefore limited himself to setting the task, leaving Klaus to choose the path himself. As a rule, in the truest sense of the word. Taking the tank to the side of the road is not the most difficult task, especially since the surviving members of the pack have already found their way out of the fire trap. The most comfortable. But Wessel squeezed through a narrow gap between two dead panzers. It turned out to be even easier than he thought. It was much more difficult not to cough, and much more terrible. It seemed to Klaus that the lungs poisoned by the fumes would simply fall out through the burnt larynx. He nevertheless coughed, until he vomited, when he realized that, having already got out, he had crushed the body of a German soldier into the ground. Cousin Gottfried once said that a poet can make a tolerable auto mechanic, but he will never make a good soldier. And yet he was wrong. Klaus realized this only later, and now he was dumbfounded to see how, 50 meters away, the earth and fire raised the metal, as if it had become weightless for a few moments. Over the years of his life, and in particular his military service, which is still a little more than just life, Captain of the 3rd rank Godunov managed to comprehend the most diverse subjective properties of time. Some of them were just right to describe with a poetic line, but, as a rule, there was no time. Others had quite clear unprintable characteristics. But never before had he felt time twist into a tight spiral. Events either slowly creep along it, and the nerves repeat the trajectory of their movement, then jump to another coil, causing something like local amnesia. For a minute or two you fall out not only from reality, but also from thoughts. Or maybe it's just plain fatigue and, as one anecdotally intelligent senior midshipman said, complicate the technical process. As a rule, this was followed by the distribution of buns and plop to the sailors. From the moment the observer rushed in, a nimble fellow from the locals, trying not only to speak, but to report according to the charter, with the message that 2 German motorcycles had appeared, the spiral stretched and twisted in the manner of a cardiogram. Godunov tried once again to critically comprehend everything that he had managed to do, to find vulnerable sides in the plan, but every now and then he lost his way, because you can't change anything. And he began to think again, because he was used to finding the optimal solution for any problem. It is not easy for a theoretician to rush into practice, and the clock measured time, as it should be, objectively. Half an hour passed, almost to the minute, before the first tanks appeared in sight. Of course, it was impossible to view the entire column from the impromptu NP, and the cinders from the exhaust pipes blocked the prospect, but the spectacle still inspired something disgustingly similar to fear. Not for himself, Godunov learned to fear for his own existence, and the current circumstances have contributed, but for the fact that things will go wrong, and all efforts are in vain. The rumble and clang came up to hear like an intermittent zh and the knock of something soft on a toy drum, but the seriousness of what was happening did not cause the slightest doubt, even at the level of emotions. And here's why: this autumn smelled like it should smell like autumn, with fallen leaves and wet needles. That is, reality is nowhere more real. Well, Alexander Vasilich, do you want to go back to the computer strategy? Huh, you old fool. Mesopotamia was gradually filled with enemy equipment. Grey, like dirt that has begun to dry. It would be time already, but is it possible that the lead tank has not yet reached the second bridge? Matvey Matveyevich, they are onto something. And he froze, half-turned towards Martinov. The explosions seemed to Godunov no louder than those with which Chinese firecrackers achieve the highest goal of their existence on a quiet night. But in appearance, Hollywood pyrotechnics are nervously smoking on the sidelines, if, of course, they are not rushing for help from the creators of computer special effects. Such an eerie aesthetic, fiery scarlet cumulus clouds in a morning frame, and above them, a sky white as red-hot metal. Uninvited guests can't complain, they are greeted with a pyrotechnic show that almost exactly imitates the colors of the Nazi flag. Through the dense curtain of fire, rushing human figures are barely guessed. Silent, no scream can break through such a curtain of noise. Shadow play. And shadows aren't supposed to roam free. That's exactly what, detachedly, and I thought at the sight of tanks and people who were trying to escape from the hell lovingly prepared for them. Well, it would have been thought without horror, even without anger, as all strong emotions were cut off at the moment when it began. It seemed as if the entire column was on fire at once. 200-liter barrels of fuel shot up into the sky. Godunov for some reason thought they looked like jugglers' maces, and collapsed down, flooding the flames with flame. There, inside the trap, something detonated, flames begotten flames. Infernal horror, since the Middle Ages, a plot so dear to the heart of the European intelligentsia, was embodied on Earth near a small Russian town in order to expel another horror from the world. And what's next? Purgatory for those who believed in the statement God im Ideons, or Valhalla for those who believed in nothing but the power of arms? Frankly, I don't care. The main thing is that everything happened exactly as it happened. A month later, when the description of the events near Dmitrovsk leaks into the British newspapers, such words will appear in the diary of an emigrant with the most White Guard surname, Golitsyn, a lieutenant who once lodged in Morel on the 17th Hussar Chernihiv Regiment. In the meantime, another bearer of a high-profile name and surname, Alexander Vassilievich Godunov, peered into the sky, in which the Valkyries appeared. 1, 2, 3, all 5 planes. He could not evaluate their work. Where did such an experience come from? Not from computer simulators? But Odintsov muttered something approvingly in an undertone. It must be understood that the idea voiced by the military commissar to use the folds of the terrain in order to quietly sneak up to the enemy has been implemented properly, and so far everything is going as it should. Only this is not Hollywood at all, fragile airplanes over a conflagration. The task of the girls is simple, like everything difficult to accomplish, having insolently dived on the column, or rather, on what was left of it, to drop the bottles with combustible mixture. The Germans quickly came to their senses, whitish threads stretched to the airplanes. Well, jump out already, live. Godunov sees how one of the 5 begins to seem to limp in the air. Alexander Vassilievich is waiting, it will even out. But no, the plane is sheer, surprisingly hard goes to the ground. What's next? Not to see in the smoke. That's it, Odintsov exhales through clenched teeth. But Godunov continues to look through binoculars, not so much believing in a miracle, but afraid to meet the eyes of the military commissar. And he looks until his eyes start to sting, either from the furious glare, or from sweat. Here, on a high-rise, the wind is much angrier than below. It makes its way not only to the heart, to the liver. The pines rustle, crunch, creak, as if all the goblin gathered at once to stare at what people are doing. They drown out the crackle of the conflagration. And Godunov bakes from the inside, and this is not a cold and not some kind of acute respiratory disease. This is not described in the literature. It would be okay only in medical, but also in art, the syndrome of a hitman. The symptoms are varied, from constant doubts about one's actions and other intellectual reflections to chronic insomnia against the background of the inability to sleep. He turned to Martinov. He peers into the distance as if he sees everything even without optics, even what he cannot see, face tense. Your firefighters are working convincingly, Matvey Matveyevich. How's the classic? We will inflate the world fire on the mountain to all bourgeois? A joke, of course, strained, but in the absence of a stamp we write on a regular one. Moreover, the guys really did a great job, clearly according to the plan, so as not to jinx it, the plan and the fact, they are by no means twin brothers. And the landmines rushed in time, cut through the column. And the barrels of fuel were skillfully installed, as if the Fritz had no more fire from them. And gifts on the sidelines, hopefully, also in time to place. If only they had time to withdraw. Godunov does not say this and, it seems, almost does not even think about it. Now he does not know from books and by no means hypothetically knows how they twist, lossies. It's wild to think that there could be more of them, but just one plane is. No, not like that. One crew. And he is no more. Who? It will be clear later. Yes, and did not have time to really get to know half of these girls. Alexander Vassilievich, if he met them again in other circumstances, he would not have recognized them by sight. For Godunov, They are the first ones he sent to their deaths. Nonsense, invent hacks that it's easy if you're sure that the end justifies the means. Surely, and that you get used to it, they lie, breeders of grey geldings sue. You can see how Odintsov got used to it. And after all, he does not look for excuses for himself, he does not even hide behind a direct order from the commander. And whether it will ever be able to perceive the female crews of light bombers as a variant of the norm for a big war is an enormous question. Neither the commander of the defensive area, nor the military commissar of Oral could know that one of the burnt tanks is now the temporary resting place of Baron Willibald von Langemann und Erlenkamp. The fate of the colonel was predetermined not by the habit of being ahead, whether on horseback in a dragoon regiment, on a tank or at the head of a column, as one might expect, but by chance. A bottle of combustible mixture that fell into an open hatch stopped the division commander's attempt to curb panic. His death will be honored with sparse lines in official obituaries. In the Third Reich they still believe in blitzkrieg and refrain from pompous grief, until the time has come to inspire the nation with sacrificial readiness for total war. Memoirists will show much greater generosity, not only attributing words to the commander of the 4th Tank, which he did not utter, something like the intriguing "I never had time," but also embellishing his death with a completely fantastic story of saving a simple panzerstews. In the Great Soviet Encyclopedia, the colonel is not mentioned, not the same value, but in the fundamental 12-volume edition of The Great Patriotic War he will be given 6.5 lines. In the new reality, Colonel Baron Langemann will never meet in the 9-day battles near Mtsensk with the colonel, the peasant son Mikhail Efimovich Kartukov, and will never complain that the Russians no longer allow their tanks to be knocked out by artillery fire. There will be no oak leaves to the Knight's Cross, no general rank. Because in this reality, he will not die during shelling near the village of Storozevoy, Donetsk region, but has already died in the interfluve of Russian rivers with non-Russian names, Narussa and Nessa. A Molotov cocktail fell from the hand of a mortally wounded girl, Klava Zelenina, less than 2 minutes before her and Katyusha's plane poked its nose into the burning ground. Langemann died exactly 1 year and 1 day earlier than it should have happened. Gefreiter Wessel heard about the death of the division commander almost immediately, as soon as he escaped from the fire and went through the frying pan. Where did I find out? And I myself did not really understand. Probably, someone casually dropped it. Klaus had experienced everything during the more than 2 years of the war, but for the first time he felt as if he had been exposed naked in the cold in a crowded place, and anyone could throw anything at a helplessly crouching little man, from a contemptuous grin to a grenade. And the lieutenant, as if he didn't care about anything, he put on the look of a thinker and argues, the idea of /U200B /U200 these Russians is utterly primitive, barrels of gasoline and expelling charges under the bottoms, that's all, any schoolboy will be able to connect them into a chain. From bossy rantings, Klaus starts to feel sick again. He gradually looks at the lieutenant. Did he notice the grimace on the face of a subordinate? Their eyes meet, and each sees his own fear in the eyes of the other, and each wants to believe that he is already doing well. And both at the same time press their heads into their shoulders when the first burst, muffled by the distance, is heard. These are ours. The lieutenant's voice sounds exaggeratedly cheerful, and Wessel hears the unspoken, but they shoot to drown out fear. No, after all, he, Klaus, is lucky. He didn't realize it when he jumped out of the second trap. And not when he saw that the entire crew had survived. Even the cowardly Franz did not die of fear. After all, he is suspiciously black-haired, probably lying that he is a Bavarian. And not when, having briefly examined the tank, he made sure that everything was in order with him too. It turns out that the greatest happiness in the world is to stand, propping up a faithful panzer with your back, while others walk in chains, combing the nearest woods. And he still dared to grumble at fate? A distant explosion puts an end to reflections. Even the lieutenant cannot say anything comforting. It is clear that a new, as yet unknown misfortune has happened. But Godunov, when the wind brings the echo of the explosion to him, nods approvingly to Martinov, so they introduce the Fritz to a type of mine explosive barriers that they had probably not known before, in other words, with stretch marks. Well, comrades, it's time for us. Artillerymen will work without them. Judging by the post-war writings of German memoirists and historians, they were constantly hampered by the peculiarities of the Russian climate and landscape, almost more than non-nightly ways of waging war. In this case, they have every right to complain about both the first and the second. Not only is the interfluve a natural trap, which it would be a sin not to strengthen with the help of sapper tricks, but also two heights are exceptionally well located on both sides of the road, 3 kilometers and 4.5. Of course, it's a pity to lose howitzers. Holy shit, Godunov. Well, in your family, as if, not a single crest was observed. Well, do not think that your, increased housekeeping was influenced by the only little Russian in the family, your aunt's husband? Although he is not only a crest, he is also a senior warrant officer. Okay, the most important thing is to save the calculations. Godunov ordered that the best of the best be found with the howitzers sent to Dmitrovsk from Ural. Their actions were scheduled almost by the second. And at every height, old-fashioned firefighters. They have already shown what they are capable of. God willing, they will show again. Perhaps, the preparatory work here turned out to be the most laborious, to drag in and install tools, and then deliver tens of kilograms of melanite, stones, and debris upstairs. In the story known to Godunov, the Fritz received 2 generous gifts, having marched victoriously from Dmitrovsk to Ural, to now leave at least 4 howitzers intact. Chapter 17. October 1st to 2nd 1941, Dmitrovsk-Orlovsky. In the Polinin family, Marinka, as it happened, was the most educated. She graduated from the 7-year school, managed to work as a cashier at the railway station, and was preparing to enter the pedagogical institute, so that later she could teach the children the Russian language and literature. Marinka loved children even more than airplanes, and she simply adored airplanes. With literacy, things were not bad with Polinina. She reread all the books that she managed to get. One misfortune, on the way of Marinka to the dream, it was not just anyone who stood sternly, but Leo Nikolaevich Tolstoy himself. It's embarrassing to admit, but a good half of War and Peace she simply flipped through, everything related to battles. All that remained was the impression from the description of the first battle, whose, Marinka no longer remembered. A person never leaves it the same as he entered. The first fight is a test of what you are generally good for on Earth. No more and no less. Wouldn't a great writer talk about all sorts of trifles? What lies ahead for them is not our battle. Hurry up, the task, well, like a Komsomol assignment. It must be done diligently and well. And Marinka does not even think that she can be killed. The real war is somewhere far away, beyond Bryansk, but here, even how to say it is not clear. And I also believe very strongly, serious, calm commanders know everything for sure and will make sure that nothing bad happens to anyone. There, the instructor Fyodor Ivanovich on Marinkin's first independent flight, pretending to be preparing to hit the back of the head, admonished, "Why the hell are you afraid of the sky? You are afraid of the earth, because I am evil on earth." And that's it. Immediately my knees stopped shaking. True, my head was spinning a little, but not from fear, but from a premonition of flight. And now, she assured the girls, everything will be all right. Moreover, the military commissar, the most important, and not that harmful uncle who ordered Marinka to go home 39 times in a row and not show himself again, is also a pilot. And the senior major, who is in charge of the entire defensive area, in general looks like a history teacher Matvey Stepanovich. It is clear that he is smart, kind, and even handsome, although he is no longer young. Here Katya giggled, slyly so, with a hint, and Marinka realized that now she would either blush or blurt out something inappropriately, but most likely, both at the same time. She came up with a third. She snapped briefly, "They say, it's all you have on your mind, phew, Philistinism," and began to wander around the room, looking with feigned curiosity at the things left by the owners. With a feigned one, because she immediately felt uneasy here, and this feeling was not going to disappear, although in 2 hours the girls seemed to have managed to settle down, have a bite to eat, make their own beds from the ones found by the owners. There were even enough pillows in embroidered pillowcases for everyone. Katya and Klavochka settled down on the master's bed, tall, with a white bedspread in lace, for whatever reason, a snowy hill. Others, on benches, Golochka Belarusian, on chairs arranged in a row against the wall. And only Marinka is on the floor, spreading a large, heavy padded jacket that Uncle Yegor Permanov gave as parting. But how will the goddaughter freeze? And she gave her pillow to Golochka. "Do you want to take someone else's without permission?" the Belarusian woman asked, throwing her huge cornflower blue eyes at her friend. Polinina thought, shook her head, hesitated a little more, and nevertheless confessed. "It's kind of annoying. Here people lived for themselves, arranged their lives, so that it was good, and beautiful, and in general," and she broke off, not knowing how to explain it, so that it would come out sensibly. But Golochka, you can see in her eyes, understood. Well, she is also not either an evacuee, or a refugee. Near the bed that was left of the sewing machine, a shaft of colored shreds, the girls, before starting to settle down, collected from the floor. Along the way, they scolded Polvoy, who had stomped across the room without looking. And why? If he is a commander, then let him trample on the necessary things, right? For the Germans, or what, save. The captain twitched his scarred cheek. Marinka could not believe that alien soldiers would come here, enemies. It was simply sickening for her to look at the torn-apart drawers of cabinets and chests of drawers the owners must have gathered in a hurry. And on a crib with a homemade teddy bear the size of a baby. And on a wonderful pillow, like a roll, lying on wooden goats and generously hung with threads with some kind of gizmos at the ends, such as large wooden nails. It seems that this is in order to weave lace Marinka has never seen, but guessed. There were dark rectangles where the photographs hung, a piece of cardboard stuck to one corner, as if there really was nothing left to save. Or vice versa, there is something, that's why they took the cards with them. And they left the cat, beautiful, smoky, at first it was shy, but now it is already purring with might and main on the knees of compassionate Klavochka. And flowers, window sills are full of flower pots. And the toy, out, was also thrown, painfully bulky, you see. How is a girl without her bear? For some reason, Marinka was sure that the child was a girl. There are no people, but their things remain. And things they won't finish. Even if they return, who knows how soon. And what will be here until they are gone? From the kitchen comes a cheerful, we were born to make a fairy tale come true. I didn't think that Drake Singh, Natasha, the eldest of the girls, troubled and strict, scoffs, otherwise, until the day before yesterday, she worked as a secretary in the militarized protection of the railway. And we were given steel arms wings, and instead of a heart, a fiery motor. Joyfully confirms from the kitchen Krasvoenlet. He sings loudly and with feeling, and what is a little out of tune, the main thing, Natasha says, is to cook better than he sings. In the cellar under the shed, in addition to the potatoes stocked up by the owners for the winter, a barrel of pickled cucumbers, jars of pickled tomatoes, well, and all sorts of jams were found in abundance. The Drake, seeing these riches, broke into a smile and said, they say, there is nothing for them to eat from the common boiler, when you can organize a real homemade dinner in flight. And the word of the Krasvoenlet does not disagree with the deed. In just a couple of hours, the house abandoned by the owners was filled and overflowed with the most life-affirming smells in the world, potatoes and pancakes fried with bacon and onions. Moreover, Drake did not let the girls go to the kitchen for a cannon shot, they say, they will only spin under their feet and chat arm in arm. Only when it was time to set the table did he call Natasha and Klavochka. For some reason, from the very beginning, he grumbled at them less than at the others. Marinka glanced at the self-assembly tablecloth, swallowed her hungry saliva, well, yes, it just seemed like she didn't feel like eating, and exhaled. Thank you, I've already eaten, it sounded, against her will, either with resentment, or offended, and she hastened to correct herself, Uncle Yegor Sukharikov is here for me. It turned out even worse, even Golochka, who understands everything, shook her head. And Drake somehow strangely smiled, he raised his upper lip, so big, strong and kind dog warns a careless passerby that he is going to growl, and grunted, generously pouring currant jam on the upper pancake. Well, you, Marinka thought she would say the usual, stubborn, but he, with ostentatious pleasure, sniffing a rolled pancake, concluded, principled. No one began to persuade Polinina, even a little annoying. And she was the first to leave the table, hungry and sad, accompanied by surprised and mocking glances, and again went to wander around the house. I came across a meeting with my bad conscience. With the same War and Peace, a 2-volume set in grey covers on a makeshift bookshelf. The hand was already reaching for the first book, and pulled back, bumping into an unexpected obstacle, a new fear. Marinka suddenly had a clear thought, if now to do something for which there was no time before, or the mood is suitable, or something else, then tomorrow. No, tomorrow everything will be fine. And just. Without any frills, as in Tolstoy's books. But it turned out differently. And not in a bookish way, and not in the way Marinka imagined. There was before, and, Polinina was lucky, there was after. Before, an almost sleepless night in a new place and on the eve of the unknown. After, futile attempts to warm up, wrapping up in Uncle's quilted jacket, and to realize that everything is the same, and the upper room with crumpled beds, and the front garden with dry phlox sticks under the window, and the monotonous cove of Drake in the kitchen, you cannot make out the words. And the smell, the same as it was at the beginning. Disorganization and homelessness smell exactly the same as unnecessary things that have been lying in the closet for a long time, and then nevertheless were thrown away. Everything is still. Here is Klovochkin's comb on a high white bed, as if a grave fence is peeking out from under the snow. Marinka is no longer shaking, she wants to go and start doing something. Difficult, dangerous, don't care. The main thing is not to stand and look. Before and after, there are a lot of them, too many. And the fight is still a real fight. In some fragments of memory, you can't put it together, even turn inside out. And I want, as if something important depends on it. Marinka thinks out of place, so in a fairy tale, I collected the word eternity from mice flows. And collected. Because everything that remains of that eternity will easily fit into a child's palm. The girls knew that at any moment the black telephone set, which Drake had dragged from somewhere else yesterday, would ring, and, all the same, the bell, loud, unpleasant, as if someone was shaking a tin full of nails with all his might, it caught them by surprise. Marinka jumped up, forgetting that a cat was perched on her lap. Natasha, she was watering the flowers, splashed water. Klovochka's hands trembled, and she could not tie the ribbon on her braid. Galia rushed to help. From the house on the outskirts to the plains, 10 minutes at a quick pace, with all the stupid fees spent twice as much. Katia still tried to return for some reason. They kept her, a bad omen, and immediately ridiculed themselves. Komsomol members, they say. It's even amazing how it was at the plains that they managed to be before Polvoy began to swear at the top of his voice. The Drake was already in place, walking around the cars with a distrustful expression, probably not for the first time. He looked around the cockpits, poked his head under the wings, and after all, he had long been convinced that these fools are not attached for nothing. So, before taking off from Oral, he spoke about iron boxes with bottles, but he also looked sideways at the girl pilots. At once, without saying a word, they decided not to be offended by the old grumbler. It is clear, after all, that out of the kindness of his soul he annoys and coaxes. In the girls, with the light hand of one of the mechanics, attachments under the wings began to be called. Pull the rope, the door will open. As for the first time they heard, they laughed, of course. Laughter, but, nevertheless, it's scary. Under each wing there are 100 bottles and 2 dozen, in a box next to the navigator. It's strange, it's unpleasant to think about those under the wings, but it's worth remembering about the box behind your back, it makes it. And what is it like for Golochka, who has it under her feet? Hurry already! Marinka squirmed, settling herself comfortably, and looked demandingly at the sky. It was as if someone in a hurry was painting dirty grey, so that the planes could somehow hide in the midst of this emptiness. On the third day, the guys from the airfield maintenance company repainted all the cars in the same untidy color. Rockets. 1, 2, 3. Southwest, Marinka determined mechanically. We waited. Now, not only to be afraid, there is no time to think. Polynina pulled her glasses on and managed to squint at the commander's duck. Why aren't you in a hurry, huh? Before the UT-2 Polvoy took a short run and took off into the air. Next, Zoya with Kappa. Here is her turn. And then, this later at Marinka does not add up in any way. The target turned out to be noticeable from afar. The black haze on the horizon grew in breadth, as it approached and upwards, by itself. Do as I do. The commander's plane descended, went between the hills overgrown with forests in order to quietly enter the target. A few almost imperceptible moments, and Polynina saw below, not a column, as she imagined it, but a mixture of black and grey and thick smoke with flashes of fire. Work on clusters of equipment, Polvoy instructed. This morning, setting the task, I repeated it again. And suddenly he added something strange. In general, drop it somewhere. If you go to the target, drop it, don't waste time. And most importantly, don't take the load with you. Marinka, to her shame, remembered this later, on the way home, to Dmitrovsk. And then, from below, a black orange-red blazed and boomed so that the plywood Pikal airplane shuddered and tilted slightly. Come on! Polynina shouted with all her strength. How the bottles fell from under the wings, she did not feel, or felt, but now she cannot remember. Where they ended up, Marinka also did not make out. She should have asked Golochka, but her tongue did not turn. Germans? She understands that there were enemy soldiers there, but she remembers something like shreds scattered on the frame from the sewing machine. But I clearly remember, the teeth ached and the plane swayed, not from a hit, it was she, leaning back with her whole body, that made the car gain altitude. Marinka had never heard anti-aircraft guns fire before, but she immediately realized that this chirp brings death. How she evaded, she herself did not comprehend. Then they walked, almost touching the tall pines with their belly. And then, she woke up already in the house. On his shoulders, over his overalls, is Uncle Gora's quilted jacket, but it still chills. And the hand hurts. It's even funny, they just left the battle, and the hand hurts from the scratches left by the vengeful cat. Marinka looks around the room, looking for something. What? Somewhere nearby, Drake mumbles, if she comes, she will never be found. Polinina. Well, now, for sure. Marinka frowns, says without turning around. To me, for Katia, she forgot here. What did she forget? All of ours are on the takeoff, the guys carried them away, Drake replies muffledly. Katia is no more. Marinka both believes and does not believe. How can it be that the plane was shot down, but she did not see? And the scallop? Klavochka would never come back for it, otherwise Grigory Nikolaevich would not have spoken in such a voice. She turns around, and headlong rushes the already well-known road to the takeoff field. Already at the edge he stumbles either on a stone, or on his own thoughts and falls. A man's hand helps her to get up, Marinka blushes and snaps. I could do it myself. You've already done it. No, it's not Polvoy's voice. You did a great job with the combat mission. She looks up and sees the commander. Did you manage it? Why? Marinka looks into calm greenish-grey eyes and, unexpectedly for herself, breaks into a cry. Everything was on fire there anyway. What's the point of throwing bottles at us? Somehow it gets quiet. So quietly that you can hear how Golochka gasped in fright. She is closest to Marinka. There is sense, you just can't appreciate it. The senior major somehow incomprehensibly, but definitely looks at her without anger. He looks down. It's good for Polinin if the top of his head reaches him up to his shoulder, but he doesn't hang over, and in general, Marinka understands, he keeps on an equal footing. The commander looks around the carriages and continues a little louder, addressing everyone. Even we can't accurately estimate how much damage you have inflicted on the enemy. One thing is clear, the Germans are stuck here for a long time. And not just near Dmitrovsk, but on the way to Moscow. He meets, without turning away, a gust of wind, barely noticeably takes a breath and straightens his cap. I don't like big words, and I don't like to say them when my comrades in arms died, but today, comrades, we began to dig the grave of Hitler's blitzkrieg. I believe that here, on Molovskaya, he hesitated, corrected himself, and on the Kursk land, we will bury him. He looked at his watch. Everyone, let's get down to business. You, nodded at Marinka, fly with me. The rest will receive further orders from Comrade Odintsov. That is, how is it? I'm flying. Marina asked in confusion. As a pilot. So far, neither you nor I have grown wings to move through the air in any other way. The senior major grins, but his tone becomes hard. And if you really intend to be a military pilot, get out of the habit of discussing orders and actions of commanders. Polinina says nothing more. And even trying not to frown. And do not blush, feeling the passenger's gaze with the back of your head. Chapter 18. October 2, 1941. Dmitrovskolovsky. Admittedly, until that day, Klaus Wessel did not know what fatigue was. I didn't even have a vague idea. It seemed to him that fatigue was when his hands hurt or his back aches after hard work. Or when he falls asleep. Or when you have to force yourself to get out of bed in the morning, because there is only a quarter of an hour before breakfast. No. Real fatigue is when you want to die. It doesn't matter where, even in this rut filled with liquid mud, as long as you don't move in a more defeatist mood. Ha! Wessel would be very surprised to learn that one of the comrades is now full of enthusiasm. So, did they all betray, even if only in their thoughts, Greater Germany? Or just tired, hopelessly, deadly? It is very difficult to think about the grandiose future of the Reich, taking away tens of tons of mangled metal and taking out of what only an hour ago was a formidable tank or impressive armored personnel carrier, what was only an hour ago people. Cynically? Yes. It turned out that such work very quickly cleans out the remnants of good-heartedness and a notorious beast crawls out of a person. Standard of bestiality? Please, if you believe the clock, you can't believe yourself anymore. It's time for dinner, but it's not the impressions of today that turn him, Klaus, from thinking about food, but only one circumstance. The dead, even moving ones, do not need food. The head seems to be empty, and the thoughts in it are like grains of sand in an hourglass, spilling over, scratching. No one has the time or opportunity to exchange news and thoughts. Accurate information about the losses, too. Of all orders, only one obvious one, dead armor, out of the way. The one that is maintainable is aside, how and where to tow is not yet entirely clear. If you can fix it on the spot, honor and praise to you, walking corpses. And yet, moving on stiff legs from pile to pile of metal, which more or less retains the shape of panzers, Gefreiter Wessel manages to catch, not to hear, but as if to inhale along with the nauseating smells of oxidized iron, gasoline, soot and burnt flesh, gossip. Security was strengthened, as far as they could. I wonder how. Or not interested. Damn, you'd think the commanders know what to expect from these Russians? There is no strength to be afraid anymore. Thoughts swarm in my head like blind kittens in a basket. 2 tanks and some motorcycles, Klaus heard out of the corner of his ear, sent to scout the ford. Lies, probably. Clearer than ever, all the equipment of the division will not pass there, and the Russians could well arrange some kind of dirty trick. Instead of fighting for real, they blow up and blow up. They spared neither their batteries on the hills, nor the bridges. How is it possible to destroy what one's own labor has been invested in? Wild nation. The sappers, of course, will build bridges. They are already building bridges. The dry, decisive clatter of axes breaks into the tired clang of armor. If you close your eyes, a peaceful picture is drawn. He, Klaus, is in Uncle Willie's auto repair shop, and on the other side of the street, workers are building scaffolding, preparing to renovate the facade of the house in which Lot Chen lives. What a pity that her windows overlook the courtyard. Only these sounds are 100 times louder. And the stench, peaceful life has completely different smells. And you can't close your eyes, you won't open them. How many panzers died? They call 50 and 100. Klaus doesn't want to know about other cars. About people. And so it is clear that the bill will go into the thousands. But to imagine such losses, but in just one battle, it would probably have been beyond the strength of Gefreiter Wessel even when they still remained. Fight? Is this a fight? The commanders eventually abandoned the idea of combing the forest. The grenadiers trampled on the edge and returned. With losses. No one taught Wehrmacht soldiers to hunt white savages and bypass the traps set by them. Klaus does not know if it occurred to him or was heard, but the words "web of death" revolve on his tongue relentlessly, to the motive of some stupid song. They say that Guderian himself is expected to arrive any minute. Plausible. The division was decapitated. For some reason, Wessel remembered a medieval miniature he had seen long ago in some book, or a stylization similar to one, the grey steel body of a dragon that looked like a high hill and, separately, a severed head, stretching from the nostrils, spreading along the dark grass or brown smoke, or gore. Then the drawing seemed disgusting. Now. Klaus would have laughed, but there is no strength for that either. Not at all left. He himself did not realize what had happened, why he was being lifted, and the Herr Lieutenant was looking from above, as if he was about to hit or, worse, cry. Gefreiter Wessel feels that he has not justified his trust. Cousin Gottfried is right, a poet will never be a good soldier. Chapter 19. October 3, 1941. Neighborhood of Dmitrovskolovsky. Night from 3 to the 4th of October. With Krupishino. Napoleon was great. But he was only a Corsican. Having acquired Moscow, he failed to save it. An excellent idea for a poem. And this means that he, Gefreiter Wessel, is gradually coming to life. A few good sips of schnapps, a hot dinner and a long nap work wonders. And the losses, in fact, were not as fatal as it seemed there, in the burning hell. How soon the division moves on depends on the repairmen. And to some extent, from him, Klaus Wessel. Still, it's damn nice and flattering when something depends on you. Klaus gets out of bed without much effort, almost as white as everything was, from bedspreads to kitchen curtains, in the Wessel house during the life of his mother, and begins to pace the room. Solid furniture, home plants, a reproduction of some picture, a field and pines. Minimum mess. Everything is the same as with ordinary people. Weird. Never before had he been stationed in a Russian town. It probably doesn't matter that Klaus only saw the outskirts in this house. More importantly, the house has a stove with a supply of firewood and even electricity. And most importantly, a trough with warm water and a real bed. And it doesn't matter at all how small this city is, behind it opens the way to Oral and to that very Moscow. Klaus looks out the window, but sees only a piece of dirt that has been torn apart by caterpillars. Yes, the roads here are disgusting. And people. Napoleon was great. But he was European. He could not know in advance that these Russians have a downright inhuman propensity to destroy their homes. Klaus read a lot about Napoleon and remembered his phrase well, what a terrible sight. It's them themselves. So many palaces. What an incredible decision. What kind of people? These are the Scythians. Wessel even imagined how it was said, with the restrained sadness of a great man who suddenly realized that he was waging war not with civilized people, but with barbarians, from whom one could expect the most insane decisions. Gefreiter measures the room with long strides, kneading his numb body. Looking and thinking. In the wall between the windows is another picture. Not a reproduction. Drawn clumsily, but with soul, a house half hidden by flowering lilac bushes, the foreground is a garden bench, a plump girl and a cat. Idle. If you don't know history and don't believe your eyes, you just can't believe that these Russians came up with the idea to mine houses, even if not their own, but their compatriots. And the central square with a monument to the Bolshevik Führer, and even in the park, they say, they found several hastily dug homemade anti-personnel. Many believe that the whole point is in the Jewish commissars. But he, Klaus, knows history. The Russians have never been able to adequately lose, they have always been drawn to destroy values. Napoleon was great. But the Führer is not just great, he is brilliantly farsighted, and his soldiers are no match for the French Corsican. This town abandoned by the inhabitants, how is it there? Fortunately, they never became their little Moscow. In just 3 hours, the sappers completely cleared it of explosives, and the exhausted brother soldiers of Gefreiter Wessel had the opportunity, after inhuman labor, to rest in human conditions and bring themselves to their proper appearance, while the repairmen who arrived in time were busy with their work. True, Klaus is a little jealous of the chamberlains from the 17th Division. The Panterfell mail informs that the 17th has moved on and will probably be in Oral tomorrow. The 1st, and respect, and awards, someone, quite likely, and vacation. Is there much honor in digging into crippled iron? The longed-for rest is so short, and the end of the work is not yet in sight. And what they experienced there, in the fiery trap, no, the cameras from the 17th were still lucky. He cannot even imagine that in another story, the one that a few days ago turned onto a different road, it was his, Gefreiter Wessel, division that first entered Oral. And he has no idea how lucky some of the cameras from the 17th. That's who Klaus does not envy at all, so it's sappers. Dog work. For both dogs and people. And they rested nothing at all, from darkness to dawn. With the first rays of the sun, forward again. Yes, and the iron with which they had to deal, unlike the panzers, did not wait for help with the patience of a good comrade, but vilely opened, as if mocking, necks clogged with earth, hanging on tired hands with an unbearable load, mockingly rattled when the sappers, making sure that it is not dangerous, they threw it aside. Milk cans, irons, stoves, smoked cast irons and other peaceful items, being buried under a thin layer of earth, immediately became not so peaceful. It was much more like Hoffman's scary fantasy than reality. Pots and garden watering cans not only took time and effort from the sappers, they delayed the offensive. Probably, at one of these moments, either a true story happened, or a legend arose, fast Heinz, having heard. The enemy is more than real, but this is hardly a consolation, 1 in a dozen, or maybe a dozen or less, who can say for sure? A piece of iron hides explosives under itself or in itself. Losses are growing, especially since it is difficult for sappers to maintain the composure necessary in their work. It is not known where Russian snipers will appear next. All attempts to counter them so far are more like hunting for ghosts. For how many lucky ones the war ended on October 3, 1941, before those damned 15 kilometers were covered, the headquarters know, or will soon find out. Others are supposed to hope that a straight, even and safe path will open further. Meter by meter, the sappers find nothing. Isn't it time to give them a rest and confine themselves to ordinary reconnaissance? But then an explosion sounds like a mournful salute, and a motorcycle that has just run briskly along a primer that has not yet been washed out by autumn rains falls on its side, like a horse stumbling at full gallop. A moment later, another explosion echoes the explosion, knocking leaves from birch trees and soldiers from motorcycles. The one who manages to grab his weapon first, and the one who turns back first in order to have time to warn of an ambush, die first. War raises the principle of reverse selection to the rank of basic law. The gunfight is short, like an epitaph on an unmarked grave. The last of the leaves that had died before their time had not yet reached the ground, when about half a dozen young men in green caps and 3 elderly uncles, dressed differently, but equally practical, emerged from the coppice. The only groan or sob, a few single shots, and now there are no other sounds, except for the rustle of leaves under the boots and a businesslike clang. The rifles are assembled, the machine guns are removed from the motorcycles. The eldest, 30 years old, greyish and respectable beyond his age, quickly puts a pack of Soldatenbooks into his field bag. Under one or another corpse, a grenade without a check, welcome to the Dmitrov militia, dead hands. As soon as a homemade mine worked under the front wheel of a motorcycle that was third in the convoy of the reconnaissance squad, a large caliber bullet escaped from the ground, tearing the rubber of the tire with the camera, destroying the steel rim, and dug into the metal of the motorcycle fork. The German flew to the ground, plowed a furrow on the dusty ground with a gas mask tank and barely had time to pull his leg out from under the collapsed piece of iron. His colleagues began to sharply turn around, 3 stretched out on the side of the road, opening aimless fire in the direction of a nearby copse. 2 more, bending down, ran up to the injured cameraman. But the forest was silent. No more shots were fired, only frightened birds fluttered from the branches. The unlucky motorcyclist, unlike his iron horse, was not seriously injured, escaping with abrasions and holes in his uniform. Together with another soldier, he dragged the crippled transport to the side of the road and waited for the rest of the forces to approach. The rest of the scouts, once again saddling motorcycles, rattled on. The Germans thought they had been hit by a single sniper shot. The found bullet of a large caliber confirmed them even more in the correctness of their guess. So they did not guess to carefully examine the tracks covered with dust. And in vain. Uncle Kostya, look, there are 2 left. Slam? Lie still, don't move. We'll scare the rest. And in general, it was I who was in your workshop, Uncle Kostya, but now the laugher is over. Now I'll tell you, comrade detached commander. And since you are now the second number, then your immediate boss. Better get out the shops, so there is no more. There are still about 100 rounds of ammunition in the bag, and only 3 pieces of magazines were issued. So don't hesitate then, Vasiliev. Lie down and rejoice that you save on weight. If only they would give us 8 ta instead of this white fin dick, then you would get tired. There are 47 pieces per disc, but multiply by 4, and the same amount in bulk. I would have died a long time ago from zeal. And you have twice as many in stores. So with me you do not serve, raspberries. Far behind the machine gunners lying on the edge of the ravine, the sounds of shots swept wildly, a machine gun fired in several convulsive bursts, seconds later a grenade sighed lonely. That's bitches. Nevertheless, they made a noise, they ran into the guys. Well, now wait for the guests to our hearts, not evil, rather, an elderly militiaman said sadly with triangles glowing lonely on the protective flannelette buttonholes of his third-term overcoat. 200 meters from the position of the machine gunners, on the road, the remaining Nazis drilled something in alarm between themselves. The owner of the crippled motorcycle stretched out behind him, as if behind a parapet, exposing the barrel of a carbine with a wasp sting. The second German, convulsively starting the engine, saddled his Berberkaker and started in the direction from which less than half an hour ago, motor intelligence rolled in. Vitya Vasiliev tried to reach for the machine gun, but was caught by the belt by Junior Sergeant Lapin. Lie down, said. Not far away, 2 shots slammed, one after the other, and the Hans, who managed to drive off about 30 meters, collapsed with his whole body on the steering wheel, knocking the 2-wheeled car to the ground. Here you go. I'm telling you, don't worry. Ramazan Gafurovich knows his business. From the best hunters in the area. Even a hazel grouse will not fly away from him, not like a Swabian. Don't let the man work, young man. A soldier hiding behind a broken motorcycle fired in the direction of the bushes that seemed suspicious to him. A return bullet struck the saddle and, tumbling, went up. The second, tearing out a tuft of cloth on the back just above the wide black belt, pierced the muscles and entered the vertebra. With a soft thud, the butt of the German carbine hit the ground. What to say? Bad luck, dude. If they knew, it would be a shame, it must have seemed to them. It's a shame to the point of snot. Because 2 minutes later, humming with engines, armored vehicles and trucks of the valiant Wehrmacht motorized infantry began to appear on the road from behind distant hillocks. As soon as it became clear to the occupiers that their scouts had been kaput, the German armored personnel carriers began to turn around in a ledge in 2 rows. Grenadiers rained down from the bodies, pulling out light mortars and MGS on their hands. All this business fuss was covered by machine guns of armored vehicles, burning bursts, like a hairdressing machine, cutting all suspicious vegetation in the reach zone and at distant copse to boot, pulling the Swedish machine gun Norbrams from the improvised parapet. Lapan and Vasiliev squatted down. The militias were hidden from enemy eyes and bullets by the slope of the ravine, which ran almost parallel to the road. What, Vasiliev, is it scary? Nothing, now they will calm down, they will come closer, we will meet them here. No, not afraid, comrade junior sergeant. Uncomfortable. You lying. Vaughan turned pale from his face. Is it somehow incomprehensible that you pray to all the saints of the Komsomol about yourself? In the first battle, everyone is scared, I know from myself. The main thing is the fear of overcoming. Then you will be alive. And then to say, is it fear now? That's when in the 19th the Markovites attacked us near Kharkov 3 times with hostility, that's when there was fear. He's rushing at you, aiming the bayonet right in the eye, and under the white cap the anti-aircraft guns are also already white. His mouth is open and you can see that the fang has been knocked out, and saliva is flowing from the corner of the mouth onto the bristles, like that of a mad dog. The roar of the last German machine gun had died down. In the silence that had fallen from the sky, the shouts of the German teams and the even growling of engines began to be heard. No way, climbed? Well, let's see. Cautiously leaning out of cover, the soldiers watched with alarm as, gradually compressing the formation so as not to fly out into the ravine, armored personnel carriers rolled, covering the grenadiers with iron sides, feverishly flashing infantry shovels, constructing parapets on the positions of mortars and MGAs. Taught by the bitter experience of 2 years of fighting, the veterans of the old Heinz were ready to flop to the ground and open a hurricane of fire at the first shot of the enemy. But the ambush was silent. Don't stop. Let's get closer. Focusingly turning the machine gun barrel behind the selected group of Germans, the old Commodate Konstantin Lapan tried not to miss the skinny German from the slot of the raised bar, who, jumping from the back of the truck, changed his non-German cap for a steel helmet. Vitya Vasiliev, having bitten his lip until it bled, was aiming with the dancing barrel of a Finnish machine gunner's magazine on an armored personnel carrier riding just along the edge of the road, and Ramazan Gafarov lay motionless in his cell, disguised in the thickets on the opposite side of the road. He lay with his face uncomfortably buried in the white roots sticking out of the cut earth, and the yellow dry inflorescences of wild dill, cut down by a machine gun burst, also lay on the white-pink flakes of the brain, no longer covered by the occipital bone, and on the distorted optical site. Silence. Peas. The roar of a shot, a flash in the rut, and the armored car walking along the road ran to the side, jerking on a broken wheel. At the same time, the shooting dissonance again spread over the quiet wasteland. They beat ours, beat the Germans. Lapan, who had emptied the 25-cartridge flat magazine in 3 angry bursts, slid down from the edge of the ravine, pulling off number 2 by the strap. Go, Vitka, go. Don't forget the ammo, I'll kill you. Slipping and stumbling, the machine gunners ran deep into the ravine, pushing their way through the bushes to the northeast. With an angry obscenity, having unfastened the unusual latch, the commander pulled the empty box from the machine gun. Stop, Vasiliev. Come on, patrons. Stop, I tell you. The guy finally slowed down, turned his head crazy. And then he got such a cuff on the back of the head that the cap that was already sitting on his head awry completely flew off half a meter. Fucked up, right? Why are you flying, as if having crap? You'll get to Moscow. Shop full, come on. Breathing raggedly, Vitya fished out an iron box from one of the gas mask bags hanging crosswise and handed it to the old carpenter. Only then did he realize what was happening. Uncle Kostya, what are you doing? The same one. In war, not in the bath. The order must be executed instantly. Here, for now, pick up the shells and the cap. While the German is out there on shit, we have time. The Swabians were detained for half an hour, no less. Now we will climb another position to look for, a little to the side. The German is an intelligent warrior, he will definitely check about mines, here we bite him again. And then, having prayed, we will retreat to ours, let Kuznetsov and his Swabians meet in his area. Let's cross the stream, and there are already guys in cars with groats. The guys there have trenches open, we will collectively rest in them. Let's wait for the fascist bastard. and it's dreary somehow to fight alone. And here is another picture that Klaus Wessel, if he were here and give free rein to the creative part of his nature, could be called pastoral and decadent. Across the road, a tilted cart with 3 wheels, scattered hay, in a kind of aesthetic disorder, from under the 4th wheel bashfully peeps out of it. Russians are incredibly stupid. No way to fix it, there's work for a quarter of an hour, they quit. What does it cost a panzer to demolish a flimsy barrier? In the next moment, the tank ceases to exist as a combat unit and begins a new life, as an obstacle much more impressive than the ill-fated cart. The driver of one of the motorcycles, out of an excess of courage or simply out of confusion, jumps forward along the side of the road, followed by an armored personnel carrier moving cautiously. Precautions turn out to be unnecessary. A heavy explosion raises a layer of earth along with the machine, sprays, burns, tears. When clods and dust return to their natural place, and not by man, it becomes clear even to the biggest optimist from among those sitting in another armored personnel carrier, there can be no living among this shuttered metal. And yet the Russians are amazingly mismanaged. Thus, to dispose of the rockets that were supposed to go as trophies to the conquerors of Europe is truly Asian fanaticism. The soldiers of the Reich are so impressed that for the next quarter of an hour they fight fiercely with the forest. In response, not a single shot was fired. And again ahead, in the gloomy light of the October evening, sappers go. They find nothing of metal at all, only a strip pitted with rust, probably a hoop from a barrel. But the blockage of felled pines is unpleasant. It is extremely unpleasant, this time from the forest, not that they are shooting, they are shooting. This was the opinion of the Herr Captain, for about 2 minutes, until his cap flew off, and next to him a young sapper howled over a dog flattened in the dust. They killed my Adele. Soldiers, hastily pouring down from the armored personnel carrier at the first shots, are deployed in a chain. Combing the forest this time proves to be as safe as it is ineffectual. If they managed to shoot one of the forest ghosts, then it was no other than a miracle. The comrades of the deceased Adele at first rush forward with enthusiasm, but soon they begin to stagnate and sneeze. For good or for worse, the Russian Tsar Peter from one German-speaking country brought the fashion for smoking tobacco in her time. And when, at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, in the appearance of a village with a truly Russian name, Lubyanka, which is a dozen kilometers from Dmitrovsk, the obstacles suddenly end, no one even believes. The inhabitants, warned by strict military men in green caps, went into the forests, since even at night it does not freeze very much, and there, you see, they will drive the Germans away. All the people in the village, the stubborn grandfather Pavel, who was the last to go to the collective farm, kept waiting for the whole world to bow to him, ask him, and the childless widow Anastasia, exhausted by angina pectoris and deliberately lagging behind her fellow villagers. The Lubyankas are on fire. Who gave the order to burn them, and was there such an order at all? It is unlikely that even those who set it on fire will be able to give a clear answer. But 2 Russians, a swarthy grey-whiskered old man and a pale, simple-haired woman, were shot by sapper Karl Werner on his own initiative. A 19-year-old native of the ancient European city of Regensburg took revenge on the Russians for his Adele. The fire can be seen far away. In the nearby village of Krupashino, where the headquarters of the mechanized regiment stopped for a short rest, the soldiers lazily blow cigarette smoke into the sky and look westward with curiosity. What is there? Rest is not for everyone. Some have to do uninteresting and, frankly, dirty, but necessary work. They brought a prisoner, a thin Bolshevik, wounded by mine fragments during the shelling of another Russian ambush. Together with a partner, these Russian machine gunners, hidden for the time being, fired at a platoon of grenadiers, pushing another truck stuck on an easy rise. Because of their Scythian insidiousness, 6 brave soldiers of the Führer found their last refuge in the military cemetery that has now appeared in this village, and the same number have now been put out of action for a long time, becoming patients of the beautiful German artists and Oberachens. It is also good that the commander of the mortar battery, which followed half a kilometer from the ambush site, upon hearing the shooting, reacted in the necessary way. Within 3 minutes, the first mortars were installed directly on the peasant carts, in which they were transported, and the Russian position was covered with the 4th salvo. Of course, the Bolsheviks would have to flee, but to escape the German mine is almost impossible. The embittered grenadiers almost sent the wounded Bolshevik on a date with their red Jude marks, heartily venting the fear that had just passed on him with their boots, but the mortar commander who arrived in time stopped the beating, believing that if necessary they would be able to shoot his legitimate prey at the headquarters of the regiment, preliminary having a serious talk with the prisoner. Now he was standing in nothing but his trousers, staggering, staining the scraped-off floorboards in the center of the room with mud from his bare feet, lightly supported by the elbow by an elderly interpreter with a guard's twisted, brill-lined moustache. Sitting at the table in front of him was a lean arbist lieutenant with a long, knot-like nose, a strange, stray leshak in golden glasses, and fingering documents with knotty fingers, two narrow forms with personal data pulled out of black hexagonal pencil cases, a factory pass and covered in blood. Komsomol ticket of the deceased number 2. Pressing his broken hand to the brown paper of the German inpack wrapping around his pierced chest, the prisoner, through the noise of blood in his ears, listened to the incomprehensible sharp speech of the German officer, interrupted by the pew-sounding words of the interpreter. So, Comrade Lapin, where did you come from here? What unit? Who is the commander? We live here. And we have one commander and commissar for all ages, Comrade Stalin. A sharp jerk, half scream half sob, yat. Good joke. But still, the unit number, the names of the commander and commissar? A poke in the diaphragm. You bastard. I told you, I'm a local. Orlovsky. There's a factory pass, already better. But I never heard the part number, again a jerk. Well, why did you get so silent, like that crow from the fable? Sing, little light, don't be ashamed. Otherwise, you'll have to die for a long time. Yes, you go, on a winter day into a rotten stump, and if it's close, through a yoke, 100 hedgehogs for you, and a locomotive in pursuit. Shaken already, German bitch. A sharp clapping of the palms on the ears and a knee to the crotch. Ay, it's not good how it turned out. It hurts, probably. It's a pity, a pity. Well, it's your own fault, there's nothing to bark at the senior in rank, non-commissioned officer. There was a non-commissioned officer, but he swam away. Today, junior sergeant of the Red Army Lapin Konstantin Alexandrovich. And you, in any way, from your nobles, will be? I didn't guess, sergeant. From the nobles. In the 20th he was promoted to military foreman. And now I would not know grief, if not like you, red-bellied scum. So, countrymen? Are you going to talk, or will you break your other arm? Yes, why wag your tongue in vain? Everything is written in my papers. Blow, blow, jerk, blow, wrench the arms out of the articular bag. The irritated arbist lieutenant is giving orders, something crackling, half rising at the table. The interrogation continues from the same place. Part number? Yes, staggered, you bastard. I don't know the number. And I don't remember the commander, how they were taken to the militia regiment, the weapons were given out, so a day later they were sent to the position. Another punch in the gut. You're lying, you red bitch. They don't make sergeants in 2 days. You yourself are a bitch. They certified you as a former squad leader for the same position, is it clear to you, Bliarity? Yeah, let's say. Well, do you even know your platoon commander? Why not know? I know, Sergeant Kochetkov. Where he is now, he has no idea. 2 days ago, on his orders, cartridges with rations were brought to us, he was somewhere near the intersection with a reserve. So, okay. Let's go further, how many soldiers are in Oral and the surrounding area? What are they armed with? Where is the artillery, tanks? Taiu, yes, you, high nobility, are a complete fool. How can I know all this? Come to Oral yourself and count, if you remain whole. Although it is unlikely. You shook me, you prevent me from dying. The invaders sleep well in the village after a hard day. All Krupyshinsky huts and barns are packed with snoring gentlemen officers and soldiers from the staff servants. The rain that began in the morning rustles on the foliage and roofs, lightly taps on the window panes. Wet bodies of cars and motorcycles gleam mately in the yards, armored personnel carriers bristling with strange giant galoshes, deprived of machine guns carefully carried away under the roof. Ordnung, now is the time for sleep. The soldiers of Germany should gain strength before tomorrow. Driven out of their homes, the few remaining peasants in Krupishino quieted down in the cellars and slattered sheds, and only sentries are desperately struggling with the approaching drowsiness. Here the postman stumbled under the canopy of the porch of the general store, put his hands into the pockets of his overcoat soaked with moisture, under the bend of the elbow, a carbine shining from the rain, belated drops break from the edge of the helmet. Now he will rest a little, fortunately, before the appearance of the breeder with a shift for more than an hour, and will again begin to pace back and forth along the street, Poston stubbornly struggles with drowsiness, but the rustle of raindrops so inexorably overrides all other sounds that the eyelids drop down by themselves every now and then. So the German heard the champing of hooves on the muddy ground too late, simultaneously with the sparkle of a rifle shot. And immediately the streets of the village were filled with traffic. Hidden by the darkness of the night, the riders, like a vengeful and winged celestial host, rushed past the fences, throwing bottles tumbling in the air at the silhouettes of enemy vehicles, and behind them bonfires of a flaming cop flared up. Flying into the yards, soldiers in blue tunics knocked out window frames with rifle butts and rolled ribbed grenades into the rooms filled with German staff officers. The Germans who managed to jump out in a panic were met by biting shots of rifles and revolvers. Somewhere on the outskirts, a Degtyarev machine gun shouted in short barking bursts. A second one answered him near the captured general store. Blue ghosts in caps with the coats of arms of the USSR on the stars were in charge in Krupashino until 6 in the morning, methodically searching all the nooks and crannies and shooting the Nazis huddled in the cracks like cockroaches. At dawn, having set fire to the 3 armored personnel carriers that remained intact, the operational cavalry group of militia under the Oriel Directorate of the NKVD, increased by the captured motorcycle and staff bus of the Skoda company, was already retreating towards Orel. It was necessary to take vehicles with them. The horses would not have carried away so many captured weapons and ammunition on packs. Only 8 machine guns were taken, and, thanks to surprise, not one of them had time to shoot. Rifles and pistols could safely be counted in dozens. It's a pity we didn't manage to find everything, we were too pressed for time. However, they gathered all their dead, first of all. And now on the seats of the Skoda were the bodies of 6 Oriel policemen and an unknown junior sergeant, who had been shot by the occupiers the night before. Thank you for downloading the book from the free electronic library royallib.com, https://royallib.com. Leave a review about the book, https://royallib.com/comment/Mileshkin_Andrew/odegrish.html. All books by the author, https://royallib.com/author/Mileshkin_Andrew.html.